You are on the long, straight road that leads back to the village, and the light has begun to fade from a sky that was once a pale, washed blue and is now turning to soft shades of lavender and grey. The air holds the coolness of early evening, and the dust kicked up by your horse's hooves settles slowly behind you like a thin fog. Your horse walks with a steady, measured rhythm, the 4-beat gait of a tired animal that knows the way home. His neck is low, his ears slightly relaxed to the sides, and you feel each breath he takes through the saddle, a gentle rise and fall that has become so familiar after months in the field that it is almost a part of your own body. You do not hurry him. There is no reason to do so. The last patrol of the day is over, and the only task that remains is the slow, quiet ceremony of putting him to rest. Ahead, the stable comes into view, a long and low building that sits at the edge of a pasture, where a few other horses stand as dark shapes against the dim grass. The building is made of timber frames and panels of whitewash wattle and daub, with a roof of thick thatch that is weathered to a deep brown grey. Even from a distance, you can see that the small high windows are dark, and the great double doors at the near end are propped open, waiting for you. The thatch muffles the world in a way you have come to appreciate, absorbing the clatter of hooves and the distant sounds of the camp or the village, leaving only the softer, nearer noises. As you turn your horse off the road and onto the track that leads to the stable gate, you hear the crunch of gravel under his shoes, a sound that is at once dry and hollow in the still air. You reach the gate. It is a simple affair of split rails, and it swings open without a sound, because you oiled the hinges yourself last week with a bit of mutton fat. You guide your horse through it, leaning down from the saddle just enough to push the gate closed behind you. There is no need to dismount here. The gate latches with a wooden drop bar that falls into place with a gentle clunk, and you straighten up again, patting the horse's warm neck. The track leads you now along the side of the stable, and you pass under the overhanging eaves of the thatch, which reach out like a sheltering hand. The smell reaches you first, even before you enter, a mixture of hay that has been cured in the sun, old leather, dry wood, and the deep, wholesome scent of horses at rest. It is the smell of home, if a hussar can be said to have a home, and it settles something inside you that you had not realized was still alert. You ride up to the open double doors and halt your horse. For a moment, you simply sit there, listening. Inside the stable, you can hear the soft rustle of straw as another horse shifts its weight and the faint, rhythmic tearing sound of a horse pulling hay from a rack. A rooster crows somewhere far off, a single note that hangs in the air and fades. You swing your right leg over the saddle, careful to lift your saber scabbard out of the way with a practiced motion and drop lightly to the ground. Your boots land on the packed earth floor just inside the threshold, making a solid, dull thud. The leather of your boots is scuffed and dusty, the tall fronts reaching nearly to your knees, and the rowel of your spur gives a tiny chime as it brushes the ground. You gather the reins near the bit and lead the horse inside, and the change from the open evening to the enclosed space of the stable is like entering a different world, one where time moves at a slower pace, and the light comes only from the door behind you and a few small windows set high in the walls. The stable is built as a central aisle with stalls on either side, each stall separated by wooden partitions that are rubbed smooth by the flanks of many horses over many years. The aisle is wide enough for 2 horses to pass, but at this hour it is empty, and your footsteps and the horse's hooves echo softly as you walk. The sound of his hooves on the earth floor is a steady 4-count rhythm that is muffled by the layer of old straw and chaff spread along the aisle. You pass a stall where a grey horse peers over the half door, its muzzle whiskered and soft, and it blows a gentle breath in your direction, as if asking about the news from the outside world. You do not stop, but you let your free hand brush its nose briefly, feeling the velvet of its skin. Then you move on to the stall at the very end of the row, the one that is yours. This stall is slightly larger, with a window that faces west, and just now the last light of the sun touches the upper corner of the wall, painting the whitewash a pale gold. You lead your horse into the stall, and he steps in willingly, his head swinging a little to take in the familiar space. The stall is square, perhaps 12 feet on each side, with walls of horizontal boards and a floor of deep, clean straw that you laid down the night before. The small window is indeed high up, and through it you can see a patch of sky that is now the color of a pigeon's breast, with 1 or 2 early stars just beginning to show. The light catches the dust motes that float lazily in the air, tiny specks that drift and swirl without any hurry, and you watch them for a second or two as your horse stands patiently, waiting for you to begin the undressing. You close the lower half of the stall door behind you, leaving the top half open so the air can move through, and then you turn to the first task, which is always the removal of your own outer gear, because you cannot properly care for the horse while you are still burdened with the weight of your day. You stand near the wooden peg that is driven into the wall at shoulder height. First your hands go to the clasp of your pelisse, the heavy outer jacket that you wear slung over your left shoulder. The pelisse is made of thick wool, dyed a dark blue, and it is trimmed with black fur along the edges, and the collar, fur that is now a little matted, from the wind of the ride. You undo the clasp, a simple brass hook and eye, and lift the garment away from your body. It is heavy, and the weight of it leaving your shoulder makes you feel suddenly lighter. You fold it once, twice, and then hang it over the peg, so that the fur does not get crushed, smoothing the fabric with a flat palm. Next you turn to the dolman, the close-fitting jacket that you wear beneath the pelisse. The dolman is also blue, with rows of horizontal gold braid across the chest, and it is fastened with a series of small ball buttons. You loosen the collar, working the top button free, and then you leave the rest of the jacket as it is for now. The stable is not cold enough to remove it completely, and you like the way it holds your warmth. But you do roll up the sleeves just a little, folding the wool back over your forearms so it will not interfere with the work ahead. Around your waist is the barrel sash, a wide band of crimson wool wound many times and knotted at the side. You untie it slowly, feeling the way the tight binding eases as the knot comes undone, and then you unwrap it loop by loop, the wool retaining the memory of your shape. You drape the sash over the same peg as the pelisse, and then your hand goes automatically to the saber belt. The belt is of thick white leather, worn diagonally across your body, and it holds the saber scabbard on your left hip and the saber tack on your right. The buckle is at your chest, and you release it with a quiet click, letting the belt go slack. You catch the saber in its scabbard before it can swing, cradling the weight of the weapon and setting it carefully on a rack that is fixed to the wall just inside the stall. The scabbard is steel, covered with black leather, and it makes a satisfying solid sound as it settles into the wooden cradle. The saber tack, a flat leather pouch that hangs from the belt and holds your papers and small personal items, is unbuckled next. You lift its strap over your head and set it on a small shelf beside the door, next to your shako, which you had removed hours ago and carried looped to the saddle. The shako is tall and cylindrical, with a brass plate on the front, and you place it on the shelf with the plate facing outward, the way you were taught. Now you stand in just your dolman with rolled sleeves, your breeches, and your boots, and you feel the absence of the weight you have been carrying all day. You take a long, slow breath, and the air in the stable fills your lungs with the scent of sweet hay and the particular, not unpleasant, musk of horse. The horse himself is standing quietly, his head turned just enough that one large dark eye watches you. He knows the routine. He has been through it 100 times, and he knows that the undressing of the man is always followed by the undressing of the horse, which is a far more lengthy and pleasant affair. You walk to his head and place your palm flat against his forehead, just below the forelock. The bone is broad and hard under the skin, and the hair is coarse and slightly oily. You leave your hand there for a moment, and the horse exhales, a warm gust that blows across your wrist. You say something to him, a few low words that have no particular meaning, just a sound that he knows, and his ears flick back and forth. You move to the side of the stall where a single lantern hangs from an iron hook set into a beam. It is a simple lantern of tin and glass with a small reservoir of oil and a wick that needs to be lit. You take your flint and steel from the small pouch on your belt and strike them together, the sparks falling onto the charred cloth until a tiny glow catches, and you touch it to the wick. The flame runs along the wick and then settles, a small bright point that grows into a steady yellow petal of light. You replace the glass chimney carefully, and at once the stall is transformed. The corners that were dim and shadowed now appear, showing the grain of the wood, the texture of the straw, the polish on the leather of the saddle that still sits on the horse's back. The lantern glow creates a small world, a bubble of warmth and light that contains only you, the horse, and the few feet of space around you. Outside the stall, the rest of the stable fades into a soft darkness that is not frightening, only quiet, a darkness that promises rest. With the light now steady, you return to the horse's side. You begin by unbuckling the throat latch, which is the thin leather strap that passes under his jaw, and you slide the headstall forward so the bit can drop gently from his mouth. The bit is a simple snaffle, and it is warm and wet, and the horse works his jaw a few times as soon as it is free, a sign that he is glad to have it out. You hang the bridle on the hook by the door, taking care that the reins do not trail on the ground. Then you reach under his belly for the girth. The girth is wide and made of leather, and it passes through the cinch rings of the saddle and buckles on the near side. You lift the small leather flap that covers the buckles and begin to loosen them, one hole at a time, slowly, because a sudden release of pressure after a long day can cause a horse to feel a strange, unsettling coldness. The leather creaks as the strap slides through the buckle, and the horse takes a deeper breath, his belly expanding as the constriction is eased. When the girth is loose enough, you let it hang straight down from the off side, and the saddle is now only resting on his back. You stand on the near side, facing the horse, and take hold of the pommel with your left hand and the cantle with your right. With a smooth upward and backward lift, you raise the saddle clear of his back. The saddle is heavy, the wooden tree inside it carrying the weight of the sheepskin padding and the leather covering, and you brace your legs as you lift. You step back and place the saddle on the wooden rack just outside the stall, positioning it with the seat facing up so the wool lining can air and dry. The saddle leaves behind a patch of slightly flattened, damp hair on the horse's back, a perfect outline of where it sat. The saddle blanket is still there, a thick rectangle of wool that has absorbed the sweat of the ride. You peel it off slowly, starting at the front and rolling it back so the loosened hair and dust fall away in a little shower. You shake the blanket out once, twice, with a snap of the fabric that sends a cloud of fine particles into the air, and then you drape it over a rail that runs along the back wall of the stall, smoothing it flat so it will dry without wrinkles. The horse shudders then, a long, rippling shake that begins at his neck and travels all the way down his body to his flanks, and you know it is a shudder of relief. You stand still for just a moment, listening. The sound of the lantern is a tiny, constant hiss, and the horse's breathing is slow and deep. The other horses in the stable have settled, and there is no sound from outside except the occasional rustle of the thatch in a very light breeze. The dust motes are still drifting in the lantern light, and you watch them for a while, not thinking of anything in particular, your mind as quiet as the stable itself. Then you remember that you are still wearing your riding boots, and while they are comfortable enough, you know that you will be here for a long time yet. So you bend down and loosen the straps of your spurs, removing each spur and setting them on the shelf beside your shako. You do not remove the boots entirely, because the straw is soft and the air is not cold, but the absence of the small metal rowels makes your ankles feel lighter. You stretch your arms up over your head, feeling the pull in your shoulders, and then you let your arms drop, and you turn back to the horse, because the evening has only just begun, and there is a long, slow list of small things to do before either of you can truly rest. For now, the horse stands with one hip cocked, his head lowered just a little, and his eyes are half closed, and you know that he is already beginning to feel the deep, creeping comfort of home. The lantern burns on, and the world outside the stall grows darker and darker, until the small window shows nothing but a square of deep blue, and the quiet wraps around you both like a blanket. The saddle sits on its wooden rack just outside the stall door, and the bridle hangs from its iron hook, and the saddle blanket lies draped over the rail along the back wall, all exactly where you placed them a few minutes ago. The horse, freed of his burdens, stands with his weight shifted onto 3 legs, the near hind hoof resting lightly on its toe, a posture of deep and growing ease. His eyes are nearly closed, the long lashes almost touching the cheek, and the occasional twitch of an ear is the only sign that he is not fully asleep. You stand in the center of the stall for a moment, feeling the quiet settle around you like the dust that drifts in the lantern light, and then you turn your attention to the leather that you have just removed, because caring for a horse is not finished when the tack is lifted away. The tack itself needs a similar kind of attention, a slow and patient cleaning that ensures every strap and buckle will be ready for the next day when the next day comes. You step out of the stall and walk the few paces to the tack room, a small chamber at the end of the stable aisle, its door a heavy wooden slab that swings open without a sound. Inside, the air is cooler and carries the concentrated scent of leather, neat's foot oil, and the faint metallic tang of brass polish. The room is arranged with careful simplicity. A long wooden bench runs along one wall, and above it, wooden pegs hold spare halters, extra reins, and coils of leather strapping. On a shelf to the left are tins of oil, pots of blacking, and a stack of clean rags made from old linen shirts cut into squares. You take one of the rags, a soft piece of fabric that has been washed many times and is now almost fluffy to the touch, and you also take a small earthenware pot that contains the neat's foot oil, a pale amber liquid that smells rich and slightly nutty. With these in hand, you return to the area just outside the stall, where the lantern's glow spills into the aisle and creates a small pool of light that is just bright enough for close work. You begin with the bridle. You lift it from its hook carefully, cradling the headstall in one hand so the reins do not trail on the ground, and you carry it to the bench that sits against the stable wall near the stall. This bench is simple, a plank of smoothed oak supported by 2 heavy legs, and it has been worn to a soft sheen by years of such evening rituals. You sit down slowly, the straw crunching under your boots, and you lay the bridle across your lap. The leather is still warm from the horse's head, and it carries the faint, salty smell of his sweat, mixed with the earthier scent of the bit. You take the clean rag and uncork the pot of oil, dipping just a corner of the cloth into the liquid so that it is damp but not dripping. Then you begin to work on the headstall, starting at the crown piece, which is the strap that passes behind the horse's ears. You hold the leather between your fingers and draw the oiled cloth along its full length with a slow, steady pressure. The leather is a deep brown, almost black in the dim light, and as the oil soaks in, it darkens further, taking on a subtle gloss that catches the lantern's flame. You work each section in turn, the cheek pieces that run down either side of the horse's face, the throat latch that you unbuckled first, the noseband with its small brass keepers. Every strap receives the same slow stroke of the rag, and you pause after each one to examine the stitching. The stitches are tiny and even, made with waxed linen thread that has held fast through many miles, and you run your thumb over them to check for any that have pulled loose. There are none, but the checking is a part of the ritual, a small act of care that fills the silence. The bit comes next. You unbuckle it from the cheek pieces, sliding the leather straps out of the bit rings, and you hold the snaffle up to the lantern. The mouthpiece is steel, a smooth and slightly curved bar that is jointed in the middle, and it is coated with a thin film of dried saliva and tiny specks of hay. You use a dry corner of the rag to wipe the metal clean, rubbing it until the steel shows a dull, even grey shine. You pay particular attention to the joints, working the rag into the small space where the 2 halves of the bit connect, and then you wipe the rings as well, removing any grit that might cause wear. The bit feels cool and smooth in your hand, and when it is clean, you set it aside on the bench, careful not to let it roll. Then you take up the reins, which are long single straps of leather that buckle to the bit rings, and you feed them through your hands inch by inch, wiping each section with the oiled rag. The reins are more supple than the headstall, softened by constant contact with your hands, and the oil sinks into them quickly, reviving the leather and bringing out the rich, dark color. You coil the reins neatly, a flat coil that sits like a sleeping snake, and you place them on the bench next to the bit. The bridle is now a collection of clean, oiled parts, and you leave them there for the moment while you turn to the saddle. The saddle rests on the rack at waist height, and you approach it with the same deliberate calm. You lift it with both hands, one on the pommel and one on the cantle, and you carry it to the bench. The saddle is heavy, and you set it down gently so that the wooden tree does not knock against the oak. The lantern light falls on the worn leather of the seat, which is shaped to the contours of your body after many hours in the saddle, a smooth depression that fits you like a second skin. You take a fresh rag from the pile, because the first one has become dark with the dirt from the bridle, and you dip it into the oil. You start at the pommel, the high front arch of the saddle, and you wipe the leather with long, straight strokes that follow the grain. The leather here is firm and has a different texture from the bridle, thicker and more rigid, and it drinks the oil slowly, the surface becoming satiny under your hand. You move to the seat, wiping the entire area where you sit, from the pommel back to the cantle, and then you wipe the skirts, the broad flaps of leather that hang down on either side and protect the horse's sides from the stirrup leathers. The skirts are creased from the motion of riding, and you work the oil into the creases with your fingertips, feeling the leather relax as it absorbs the moisture. Beneath the saddle, the panels are stuffed with wool and covered with a softer, unpolished leather. You turn the saddle over carefully, balancing it on its pommel and cantle so the underside faces up. The fleece that pads the panels is sheepskin, and it is matted from sweat and pressure, small tufts of wool clinging together in damp clumps. You do not oil this part, because oil would gum the wool and irritate the horse's back, but you take a dry rag and you rub the fleece gently, fluffing the wool and separating the tufts. The motion is repetitive and soothing, a circular rubbing that lifts the nap and allows the air to circulate. A faint steam, just a ghost of warmth, rises from the fleece as you work, carrying the clean, animal scent of the sheep and the horse together. You spend a long time on this, turning the saddle to reach every part of the panels, and when you are finished, the fleece looks almost dry and is soft to the touch. You also check the stitching that holds the panels to the tree, a double row of stitches that must bear the weight of your body every day, and you find them all intact. The girth is hanging over the stall door where you left it, a wide strap of leather with 2 buckles at each end. You take it down and sit once more on the bench, laying the girth across your knees. The leather is stiff in some places and soft in others, the areas near the buckles bearing the most wear from the constant friction against the rings. You wipe the entire length with the oiled rag, taking extra care around the buckle holes, where the leather can crack if it becomes too dry. The buckles themselves are iron, blackened with age, and you wipe them as well to remove any buildup of sweat and dust. Then you test the tongues to ensure they spring back freely. The girth has a middle section that is lined with a softer leather, the part that would sit against the horse's belly, and you notice that the stitching there is slightly frayed from the constant stretching, so you make a mental note to repair it soon. You oil this section lightly, and then set the girth aside, its leather now supple and ready. Now you gather all the bits of metal that need a different kind of care, the bit itself, the brass keepers on the noseband, the small buckles on the bridle, and the stirrup irons that hang from the saddle. You take a third rag and a small tin of brass polish that you fetch from the tack room, a paste that is white and chalky and smells faintly of ammonia. You dip the rag into the paste and begin with the stirrup irons, holding each iron in your hand and rubbing the brass footplate until it gleams with a soft, warm glow. The stirrup leathers you have already wiped down, and they hang now, cleaned and oiled, from the saddle. The polish work is slow and exact, because the brass must be bright enough to catch the light, but not so heavily polished that the metal wears thin. You clean the keepers on the noseband next, tiny rectangles of brass that hold the straps in place, and then you give the bit a final touch, not with polish, but with a clean dry cloth to remove any fingerprints. When all the metal parts are gleaming, you reassemble the bridle, the bit buckled back onto the cheek pieces, the reins attached to the bit rings, the noseband threaded through its keepers. The bridle is whole again, and you hang it back on its hook by the stall door, where it waits with the quiet patience of a thing that knows its purpose. The saddle is now clean, its leather oiled, and its fleece fluffed, and you carry it back to the rack. You place it on the rack with the seat up, exactly as it was before, and you drape the girth over the saddle seat so that it will be close at hand in the morning. The saddle blanket is still on the rail, and you check it one more time. It is now dry to the touch, the wool feeling crisp and clean, and you fold it carefully into a rectangle, smoothing out every crease with your palms, and you lay it on top of the saddle. The three items together, saddle, girth, and blanket, form a neat stack of readiness that is satisfying in its order. Throughout all of this, the horse has remained still, his breathing a low rhythmic sound that you have been aware of the whole time, like the background hum of the world. You return to the stall, stepping over the low threshold, and you stand beside him for a moment. He has not moved, except to shift his resting leg, and the near hind hoof is now flat on the straw once more while the off hind hoof is cocked. The stall is filled with the smell of clean leather, oil, and the horse himself, a combination that is deeply familiar and profoundly calming. You glance up at the small high window. The square of sky has deepened from dove grey to a dark indigo, and the stars you saw earlier are now joined by many more, a scatter of tiny cold lights that seem very far away. Inside, the lantern continues its gentle hiss, the flame perfectly steady inside its glass chimney. You take the clean rags and the pot of oil back to the tack room, placing each item in its designated spot so that you will know where to find them tomorrow. The tack room is dark except for the light that spills in from the aisle, and the shapes of the spare tack on the walls seem like the quiet ghosts of other horses, other days. You close the door behind you, and the latch clicks softly into place. The stable aisle is empty and still, the half-doors of the other stalls all closed, the horses within them invisible but audible as occasional sighs and the rustle of straw. You walk back to your own stall, and you pause in the doorway, leaning your shoulder against the frame. The horse turns his head slightly, his great dark eye reflecting the lantern flame as a tiny glowing dot, and he blows a soft breath through his nostrils, a sound that is not quite a nicker, but something close, a greeting or a question. You do not answer with words, but you reach out and touch the flat plane of his cheek, just below the eye, and you let your hand rest there for a moment. The skin is warm and the short hairs are smooth, and the bone beneath feels as solid as the earth itself. Then you drop your hand and step fully into the stall, because the tack is done, but the horse himself has not yet been groomed, and the next part of the evening's work is waiting for you with the patience of the lantern and the stars. The lantern burns on its iron hook, the flame steady and small behind the glass chimney, and the pool of light it casts upon the straw seems to have grown warmer and more settled now that the tack is clean and put away. The horse stands in the center of the stall with the patience of an animal that knows the rhythm of the evening, his head low and his weight balanced on 3 legs, while the 4th rests with the tip of the hoof just touching the straw. You have oiled the bridle and wiped the saddle, and your hands still carry the faint, pleasant scent of neatsfoot oil and brass polish, a smell that mixes with the deeper notes of hay and horse. The next part of the ritual is one of the oldest and most important, because a cavalryman's horse travels on his feet, and every stone, every crack, every bit of packed dirt left unattended can become a problem by morning. So you fetch the hoof-pick from its place on the small shelf beside the door, a simple tool of iron with a curved point and a flat, blunt end, and you carry it to the horse's side, feeling its familiar weight in your palm. You begin on the near side, which is the horse's left, because that is the tradition and because the horse expects it. You stand facing his tail, your left shoulder near his left shoulder, and you run your left hand down the back of his foreleg, starting at the top of the cannon bone, just below the knee. The leg is straight and solid, the tendons tight like cables under the skin, and your fingers trail down over the fetlock joint and the long pastern until they reach the coronet, the soft band of tissue where the hair meets the hoof wall. The horse knows this touch, and he shifts his weight slightly to free the leg. You make a soft clicking sound with your tongue, not a command but a request, and he lifts the hoof in response, bending his knee and offering you the foot as if it were the most natural thing in the world. You take the hoof in your left hand, cupping the hard wall in your palm, and you feel the rough texture of the outer surface, the faint ridges that mark the growth of the horn like the rings of a tree. The hoof pick is in your right hand, and you bring the curved point to the underside of the hoof, working with slow and deliberate care. The first thing you do is run the point along the cleft of the frog, the V-shaped groove in the center of the sole, and you loosen the packed material that has gathered there. The material is a mix of dried mud, bits of straw, and small gravel from the road, and it crumbles away as the pick moves through it, falling to the straw in a fine, dark shower. You work from the heel towards the toe, scraping gently along each side of the frog, and the sound is a soft, gritty scraping that is the only noise in the stall besides the horse's breathing. The pick dislodges a small stone, no larger than a pea, that was wedged in the groove where the frog meets the sole, and you flick it away with the tip of the tool, hearing it strike the straw with a tiny tap. You continue cleaning the sole itself, the concave area between the frog and the hoof wall, scraping away the thin layer of packed earth that has been pressed into a hard plate by the weight of the horse and the miles of road. The sole is a pale, horny color, and beneath the dirt it is slightly moist, the living tissue that protects the inner structures of the foot. When the sole and the frog are clean, you use the flat end of the pick to tap gently around the hoof wall, checking the shoe. The shoe is an iron crescent, fitted to the shape of the hoof and held in place by small nails that have been driven through the wall and clinched on the outside. You tap each nail in turn, listening for the solid ring that tells you it is tight, and you find none that sound hollow or loose. Then you run your thumb along the clinches, the small folded over ends of the nails on the outer wall, feeling for any that might have risen or broken. The metal is cool and smooth, and the clinches lie flat against the horn, just as they should. You also examine the shoe itself, looking for any signs of uneven wear. The toe of the shoe shows a slight polishing, a brighter silver where it is scraped against the road, but the thickness is even and there are no cracks. You lower the hoof back to the straw, letting it rest gently, and you straighten up for a moment, stretching your back and rubbing the horse's flank with your free hand. His coat is warm and slightly dusty under your palm, and he lets out a long, slow breath that flutters his nostrils. Next you move to the near hind leg, which is the left hind. You stand in the same position, facing the rear of the horse but slightly to the side, not directly behind, because a horse can be startled by someone standing in his blind spot. You run your right hand, which now holds the pick, down the hind leg, starting at the thick muscle of the gaskin and moving down over the hock, a bony joint that is sharp and angular. The horse's hind legs are powerful, built for pushing, and the tendons that run down the back of the cannon bone are broad and flat. As your hand passes the hock, you feel a slight warmth, which is normal after a long ride, but you press your palm against the joint for a few seconds to check that there is no excessive heat or swelling, and there is none. The horse shifts his weight, and you ask for the hoof with a soft word and a gentle pressure on the leg. He lifts the hind foot and lets you cradle it, the hoof resting on your thigh as you bend forward. The near hind hoof is heavier than the forehoof, and the shape is slightly different, more oval, with a wider frog and a deeper cleft. You bring the pick to the hoof and begin the same slow cleaning. The packed material in the hind foot is often denser, because the hind hooves carry more of the pushing force and grind debris deeper into the grooves. You start at the heel, working the point of the pick into the cleft of the frog, and you scrape out a plug of dried mud that has been compressed into a dark, hard mass. It comes away in one piece, revealing the healthy, elastic frog beneath, which is a dark grey color with a slightly rubbery texture. You clean the grooves on either side of the frog, the spaces called the collateral sulci, and you remove more gravel and a few strands of hay that have twisted themselves into tiny ropes. The scent of the hoof is earthy and not unpleasant, the smell of keratin and soil. You examine the shoe on this foot as well, tapping the nails and checking the clinches. One of the clinches near the heel feels slightly rough under your thumb, and you make a mental note to tap it down with a hammer later, but it is not loose enough to be a danger. You also check the heel of the shoe for any sign of a sprung heel, where the metal pulls away from the hoof, and you find it secure. The inspection done, you lower the hind hoof back to the straw, and the horse puts his weight on it with a soft thud. You pause again, this time, to walk around to the horse's head and give him a moment of connection. You stand in front of him, just to the left of his muzzle, and you run your hand up the white blaze on his face, a stripe of white hair that starts between his eyes and widens over his nose. The blaze is a characteristic of his breeding, and you have traced it with your fingers 1,000 times. His ears, which had been relaxed to the sides, swivel forward to catch the sound of your movement, and you feel his warm breath on your wrist. You say a few quiet words, nothing important, just sounds that he knows, and you see the muscles around his eyes soften. Then you move to his offside, the right side, to repeat the ritual with the remaining 2 hooves. The off foreleg is lifted in the same way as the near foreleg, with your right hand running down the leg this time, and your left hand taking the hoof. The horse offers it to you without hesitation, and you cradle the hoof, feeling the same rough, ringed texture of the wall. The cleaning process is identical in its steps, but different in its details, because no 2 hooves are exactly alike. This foot has a small chip in the hoof wall near the toe, a tiny piece of horn that has broken away, likely from a stone on the road. It is superficial, not deep enough to reach the sensitive laminae beneath, and you run your thumb over it to confirm that the edges are smooth. You will watch it over the next few days to make sure it does not grow, but for now it is nothing to worry about. The frog on this foot is slightly drier than the others, with a few small flakes of loose horn peeling away at the edges, and you pick them off carefully with the point of the hoof pick, exposing the healthier horn beneath. The shoe is sound, the nails tight, and you set the hoof down with the same gentle care. Finally, you move to the off hind, the last hoof. The horse is now fully relaxed, his head hanging low and his eyes half closed, and he barely shifts as you take up your position. The off hind hoof is lifted and cradled on your thigh, and you begin the final cleaning of the evening. The material packed into this foot is similar to the near hind, a dense mix of mud and chaff, and you scrape it away methodically, starting at the heel and working forward. The pick encounters a small burr, a round, spiky seed that has lodged itself in the junction between the frog and the sole, and you pry it loose carefully, pulling it out with your fingers and tossing it into the dark corner of the stall. The frog itself is cool and firm, a sign of good health, and the sole is clean and pale. You check the shoe with the same tapping routine, and all is well. You lower the hoof, and the horse shifts his weight onto all 4 feet, a sign that the inspection is complete. You straighten up, feeling a small ache in your lower back from bending, but it is a pleasant ache, the kind that comes from useful work done slowly. With the hoof pick still in your hand, you walk to the bucket of water that sits in the corner of the stall, the one you use for washing. You dip the pick into the water to clean it, swishing it around to remove any remaining dirt, and then you dry it on a rag that hangs from the wall. You place the pick back on the shelf, and you return to the horse's side. Now you crouch down again, this time with nothing in your hands, and you run your palms over each hoof in turn, from the coronet down to the ground, feeling for any heat that might indicate inflammation. The near fore feels cool, the temperature of the surrounding air, the walls smooth and dry. The near hind is the same, a pleasant coolness that speaks of good circulation. The off fore is slightly warmer, but only because it was the last foreleg you inspected, and the blood is still flowing close to the surface. You hold your palm against it for a longer count, and the warmth is even and fades as you wait, not the focused heat of a problem. The off hind is cool, and you nod to yourself, satisfied. You also check the digital pulse, a small artery that runs down the back of the pastern, pressing your fingers gently against the skin on each leg. The pulse is faint and steady, a soft rhythmic throb that you can barely feel, and you count it for a few seconds, matching it to the slow beat of your own heart. All is as it should be. You stand up for the last time during this part of the evening and stretch your arms over your head, feeling your spine lengthen. The horse, as if sensing that the inspection is over, gives a full body shake that starts at his head and travels down his neck, through his barrel, and all the way to his tail, a cascade of quivering skin and rustling hair that sends a puff of dust into the lantern light. The dust motes dance and swirl, and you watch them for a while, your mind empty and quiet. You pick up the bucket of dirty water and carry it out of the stall, down the aisle, and out the stable door to the patch of grass beyond, where you empty it in a slow arc that glints in the starlight. Then you refill the bucket at the stone trough, the water splashing softly, and you carry it back to the stall, setting it in its corner for later use. The horse has not moved, except to lower his head to the straw and lip at a few loose strands, not eating, just exploring with his soft muzzle. You lean against the stall partition and cross your arms, looking at him, and you feel a deep and quiet satisfaction that has no name. His hooves are clean, his shoes are tight, and the miles of the day have been erased by the simple, repetitive work of your hands. The lantern continues to blow, and outside the small high window, the stars continue their slow wheel across the sky, and the night settles deeper into the thatch and the timber and the quiet heart of the stable. The hoof pick is back on its shelf, and the bucket of fresh water stands in the corner, its surface still and dark, reflecting a tiny sliver of lantern light that trembles slightly with the flame. The horse has settled into a deeper stillness now, his 4 clean hooves planted squarely in the straw, and the faint earthy smell of cleaned horn lingers in the air around him. You roll your shoulders once, feeling the muscles loosen after bending for so long, and then you turn to the small wooden box that sits beneath the shelf, a box you made yourself from scrap pine and a few nails. Inside, wrapped in a piece of old sacking, lies the currycomb. You lift it out and hold it in your hand for a moment, feeling its familiar shape. The comb is made of wood, a flat oval block that fits comfortably in your palm, with a handle that curves slightly to match the grip of your fingers. On the underside, set into the wood in neat rows, are short teeth made of tin, blunt at the tip so they will not scratch the skin, and each tooth is slightly worn from use, polished to a dull gleam. The leather strap that passes over the back of your hand is soft and supple, and you slide your fingers beneath it, settling the comb into your grip, as if it were an extension of your own arm. You begin on the near side, the left side, because the horse expects it, and because starting in the same place every evening is a part of the quiet order that holds the world together. You stand close to his shoulder, close enough that you can feel the radiant warmth of his body, and you place your free hand flat against his neck for balance. The currycomb is designed to be used in small circular motions against the lie of the hair, working deep into the coat to loosen the dried sweat, the dust, and the fine particles of dead skin that have accumulated over the course of a long day's ride. You press the teeth gently against the base of his neck, just in front of the shoulder, and you begin to move the comb in a slow, steady circle. The motion is a rotation of your wrist, not your whole arm, and the teeth pass through the coarse outer hairs and reach the softer undercoat beneath. The sound is a soft, rhythmic scratching, like the whisper of dry leaves stirred by a breeze, and almost immediately you see a fine cloud of dust rise from the coat, pale and grey, catching the lantern light as it drifts upward and then settles slowly onto the straw. You work the comb in overlapping circles, moving gradually up the neck towards the jaw. The hair here is shorter and lies flat against the skin, and the comb encounters a slight resistance where the sweat has dried into a thin, salty crust. You do not press harder, you simply let the teeth do their work, the gentle abrasion loosening the crust and breaking it apart until the hair beneath feels soft and clean. The horse lowers his head a fraction of an inch, and his lower lip droops, a sign of contentment that you've seen 100 times, but that never fails to bring a quiet satisfaction. You pass the comb over the crest of his neck, where the mane begins, and you are careful to work around the roots of the mane rather than pulling at them, because the long hairs are sensitive and you do not want to cause any discomfort. The dust continues to rise, a steady, gentle snowfall of tiny particles that glimmer and dance in the warm glow of the lantern, and you watch it for a moment, mesmerized by the slow, silent movement. When the left side of the neck is finished, you move your hand to the shoulder. The shoulder is a broad, sloping mass of muscle that drives the front leg, and the coat here is thick and dense, with a slight wave to it that catches the light. You reposition the currycomb and begin a new set of circles, starting at the top of the shoulder blade and working your way down towards the point of the shoulder, the bony prominence that moves with each step the horse takes. The comb traces the contours of the muscle, rising over the curve and dipping into the hollow behind the elbow, and you adjust the angle of your wrist to keep the teeth in contact with the skin. The horse leans into the pressure, just slightly, a subtle shift of weight that tells you he enjoys the sensation, and you respond by leaning back, using your body weight to steady yourself as you work. The sound of the comb changes as you move over different parts of the body. On the shoulder, where the muscle is firm and flat, the scratching is deeper and more resonant, while on the softer areas near the elbow, it becomes lighter and quicker. You pause for a moment to clean the currycomb. The teeth have collected a fine grey powder of dust and loose hair, and you tap the comb gently against the heel of your boot to dislodge it. The powder falls to the straw in a small soft pile, and then you bring the comb back to the horse's side, ready to continue. The next area is the barrel, the long curve of the rib cage that runs from behind the shoulder to the flank. You stand facing the horse's side now, your feet planted in the straw, and you reach across with the comb to begin at the top of the barrel, just below the line of the backbone. The circles here are wider and slower because the surface is larger and the coat is not as thick as on the neck, and the comb moves easily through the hair. You work your way down in overlapping rows, each circle overlapping the last by half, so that no patch of skin is missed. The horse's breathing is slow and deep, and you can feel the rise and fall of his ribs under your hand, a gentle oceanic rhythm that guides the tempo of your work. The dust continues to rise, and the air in the stall becomes hazy with it, a soft, golden haze that makes the lantern light seem almost solid, as if you could reach out and touch it. As you move towards the flank, the hair becomes finer and the skin more sensitive, and you lighten the pressure of the comb accordingly. The flank is the area just in front of the hind leg, where the belly tucks up towards the loin, and the horse's skin twitches slightly when you first touch it, a reflex that subsides as soon as he recognizes the familiar sensation. You make your circle smaller here, more delicate, and you watch the horse's ear on this side, which swivels back to listen to you and then relaxes forward again. The comb picks up less dust now because the sweat does not accumulate as heavily on the flanks, but you continue the motion anyway, because the grooming is not only about removing dirt, it is also about the massage, the stimulation of the skin and the circulation of blood, and the quiet, wordless communication between you and the horse. You think about this as you work, not in words, but in a kind of drifting awareness, a sense that the rhythm of the comb and the warmth of the horse are knitting together the frayed edges of the day. After the flank, you move to the hip, the large rounded mass of the hindquarter. You step back half a pace to give yourself room, and you begin at the top of the croup, where the spine meets the pelvis, and you work the comb in circles that follow the slope of the muscle down towards the point of the hip. The hair here is coarser again, and the muscle beneath is dense and powerful, and the comb makes a deeper scratching sound as it moves through the coat. The horse shifts his weight, transferring it to the off hind leg, and you feel the muscle tense and then relax under your hand. You continue down the thigh, the long muscle that runs from the hip to the stifle, and you notice a small patch of dry skin near the stifle joint, a place where the hair is slightly rougher. You spend a little extra time there working the comb in gentle circles until the dry flakes loosen and fall away, and then you smooth the hair down with your palm to check that the skin beneath is healthy and pink. The near side is now complete, from the poll to the tail, and you step back to look at the horse. His coat is roughened and tufted where the comb has lifted the hair against its natural direction, and small particles of dust still cling to the outer tips, waiting for the brush that will come later. The horse looks slightly disheveled, like a pillow that has been fluffed, and you smile at the thought, a small, private expression that no one sees. You clean the currycomb again, tapping it firmly on your boot, and then you walk around to the offside, the right side, to repeat the entire process from the beginning. You start at the offside of the neck, standing in the same position relative to the horse, and you place the comb at the base of the neck, just as you did on the left. The circles begin again, slow and steady, and the dust rises in the same soft clouds. The horse's offside is slightly more ticklish. You know this because his skin twitches a little more on this side, and he swings his head around once to look at you with one dark, questioning eye. You pause and let him sniff the comb, which he does with a loud snuffling breath, and then he turns his head back and relaxes, satisfied that nothing has changed. The neck is worked from base to jaw, the shoulder from top to point, the barrel from spine to belly, and your hams fall into the same rhythm they have known for years, a rhythm so deep that it feels like a part of your own heartbeat. The offside takes just as long as the near side, because there is no reason to hurry, and you find that the repetition is not boring but rather deeply restful, a kind of moving meditation in which the only things that exist are the comb, the horse, and the circle of lantern light. When you reach the off hind quarter, you notice a small burr tangled in the hair near the tail, a round prickly seed that must have caught there during the ride. You stop the circular motion and use your fingers to pick it out, pulling it gently so that the hairs do not break, and then you drop it into the straw and resume the combing. The horse flicks his tail once, a casual, lazy movement, and then he is still again. You work all the way down to the gaskin, the muscle just above the hock, and then you stop, because the lower legs are too sensitive for the curry comb and will be groomed with a softer brush later. You straighten up and stretch your back, placing your hands on your hips and arching backwards, and you feel the pleasant burn of muscles that have been used gently and well. Now there is one special area that you always pay extra attention to, the girth line. This is the strip of skin that runs around the horse's belly, just behind the forelegs, where the girth sits during the ride. Even with a clean saddle blanket and a properly adjusted girth, the pressure and friction of the day can leave the skin slightly compressed and the hair flattened. You move to the near side girth line first, crouching down so that your eyes are level with the area. The hair here is indeed flat and damp, and the skin beneath looks slightly indented, a faint line that marks where the girth strap passed. You take the curry comb and use it with an even lighter touch than before, making very small, gentle circles that barely press into the skin, more of a massage than a curry. The horse sighs, a deep, gusty breath that ruffles the straw near his feet, and you feel the tension in the skin release under your fingers. You work along the entire length of the girth line on the near side, from just behind the elbow to the middle of the belly, and then you move to the offside and repeat the process. The offside girth line is slightly less marked, because the buckles are on the near side and the pressure is distributed differently, but you treat it with the same care. When you are finished, the skin in both areas is pink and warm with increased circulation, and the hair has begun to fluff up again, regaining its natural texture. You stand up for the last time and look at the curry comb in your hand. Its teeth are clogged with a thick mat of grey dust and loose hair, and you tap it out one final time, watching the debris fall to the straw. Then you run your thumb over the teeth to check that they are clean, and you set the comb aside on the shelf. The horse's coat is now thoroughly loosened, the dirt and dead hair raised to the surface, and the air in the stall is thick with the fine floating particles that you have released. You can see them in the lantern light, a million tiny specks that move in slow, aimless currents, and the smell of the stall has changed. Beneath the sweetness of hay and the richness of leather, there is now a dry, dusty scent, like old earth and warm wool. That is the smell of a horse being properly groomed. The horse himself looks larger somehow, his coat standing up in rough peaks and walls, and he turns his head to nuzzle at your sleeve, his muzzle leaving a damp spot on the wool of your dolman. You reach up and scratch the spot just behind his ear, the place where the hair is softest, and his eyes close completely for a few seconds, the long lashes resting on his cheek. The night outside the small high window is now fully dark, the square of indigo replaced by a deep velvety black, and the stars are brighter than they were, cold and sharp in the winter sky. Inside the stall, the lantern continues to burn, its flame perfectly steady, and the warmth of the horse and the straw and your own body has created a small pocket of comfort that the cold cannot touch. You take a moment to simply stand there, your hand resting on the horse's neck, feeling the slow, steady thump of his pulse under the skin, and you let the quiet fill you up until there is room for nothing else. The curry comb has done its work, and the next step, the brushing away of all this loosened dust, will come soon. But for now, the stillness is enough, and the night wraps around you both like a blanket that has been waiting all day to be unfolded. The curry comb has done its work, and the evidence of that work hangs in the air of the stall like a fine golden mist, a haze of dust and loose hair that drifts slowly in the lantern light. The horse stands rough-coated and patient, his hair lifted into small peaks and whirls, and his skin tingles with the increased circulation that the circular massage has brought. Now it is time for the next step, the removal of all that loosened debris, and for this you need the dandy brush. You return the currycomb to its place in the pine box and take up the brush that hangs from a leather loop on the wall beside the shelf. The dandy brush has a wooden back, shaped to fit the curve of your palm, and its bristles are made of stiff rice root, a pale, cream-colored fiber that is firm without being harsh. The bristles are set in tight rows, and they have been trimmed flat across the ends so that they form a uniform, brush-like surface. You hold the brush in your hand and run your thumb over the bristles, feeling their springy resistance, and then you take up the metal currycomb that you will use as a cleaner, a flat, rectangular plate of iron with short teeth, which you hold in your other hand. The two tools together, the brush and the cleaner, are the instruments of the second grooming, and you are ready to begin. You position yourself on the near side of the horse, just as you did with the currycomb, standing close to his shoulder and facing his tail. The dandy brush is used differently from the currycomb. Instead of small circles against the hair, you use long sweeping strokes that follow the direction of the coat, flicking the dust outward and away. You start at the neck, placing the brush at the top of the crest just behind the ears, and you draw it down the length of the neck with one smooth, continuous motion. The bristles pass through the roughened hair and catch the loosened particles, carrying them to the surface and then releasing them in a fine spray that glitters in the light. The sound is a soft, rhythmic hiss, like the whisper of wind through dry grass, and it is a sound that has a particular kind of music to it, a steady, even cadence that you have come to associate with the deepest peace of the evening. At the end of each stroke, you lift the brush and, without pausing, draw it across the teeth of the metal currycomb held in your left hand. The metal teeth scrape the dust from the bristles with a quick, sharp sound, and a small cloud of grey powder falls from the brush and drifts down to the straw. You repeat this motion again and again, stroke, clean, and each repetition is identical to the last, a loop that turns minutes into something fluid and unmeasured. The neck requires perhaps 20 strokes before the hair begins to lie flat, and the dust stops rising in thick clouds. You work your way down from the crest to the lower part of the neck, where the hair is shorter and finer, and you adjust the pressure of the brush accordingly, using a lighter touch on the more sensitive areas near the throat. The horse stretches his neck forward slightly, extending his head so that the skin is taut, and you brush along the groove of the jugular, where the great vein runs close to the surface, using strokes so gentle that the bristles barely indent the skin. The vein pulses softly, a visible rhythm that matches the slow thump you felt earlier under your palm, and you work around it with the care of someone who knows the anatomy of the horse, as well as his own. When the neck is done, the hair is smooth and glossy, the dust removed, and the true color of the coat, a deep, rich chestnut with hints of copper, has begun to emerge from beneath the grey film of the road. You move to the shoulder next. You stand with your feet set wide in the straw, your body angled so that your arm can sweep across the broad expanse of muscle. The brush descends from the top of the shoulder blade, where the withers rise in a bony ridge, and it travels down the slope towards the point of the shoulder with the same long, flowing stroke. The shoulder is a landscape of subtle curves and hollows, and you follow the contours with the brush, letting your wrist adjust the angle of the bristles so that they maintain full contact with the skin. The dust here is heavier than on the neck because the shoulder bears the brunt of the wind and the dust of the road, and each stroke releases a thicker cloud which you clean from the brush with a decisive scrape across the metal teeth. The scraping sound provides a punctuation to the rhythm, a brief metallic note that punctuates the softer hiss of the bristles. After each cleaning, you tap the metal currycomb against your boot to dislodge the accumulated dust, and the soft tap-tap is another steady beat in the quiet symphony of the stall. The barrel comes next. You step back half a pace so that you can reach the whole side of the horse, and you begin at the top of the rib cage, just below the spine. The strokes here are the longest of all, sweeping from the top of the barrel all the way down to the line of the belly, and they follow the gentle outward curve of the ribs. The brush moves with the grain of the hair, which on the barrel grows in a slight downward and backward direction, and you angle the brush to match this flow. The horse's breathing deepens as you work, each inhalation lifting your hand slightly and each exhalation lowering it, so that the brushing becomes a kind of dance between your arm and the horse's lungs. The dust that rises from the barrel is a paler grey than the dust from the shoulder, mixed with fine particles of chaff from the saddle blanket, and it settles on your sleeves and on the front of your dolman, a fine coating that you will brush off later. You do not mind the dust. It is a part of the work, a badge of the evening's ritual. You continue down the flank, where the hair is shorter and the skin is thin enough to show the faint tracery of veins beneath. Here you switch to shorter strokes, because the flank is a sensitive area, and the long sweep of the brush might tickle or startle the horse if applied too vigorously. You hold the brush with your fingers close to the bristles for more control, and you use quick, light flicks of the wrist that send the dust flying in small, neat puffs. The horse's skin twitches once or twice, a reflexive quiver that ripples across the flank like a stone dropped into still water, and you pause to let the sensation pass, resting your free hand on his hip to steady him. Then you resume, and the twitching subsides and the horse relaxes once more into the rhythm of the grooming. The hip and hind quarter are next. The brush travels over the rounded curve of the croup, following the slope down to the point of the hip, and then along the thick muscle of the thigh. The hair here is dense and coarse, and the strokes require a firmer pressure to penetrate the coat and lift the remaining dust from the underlayer. You lean into the work slightly, using the weight of your body to drive the brush, and the muscles in your own shoulder and arm begin to feel the pleasant ache of sustained, gentle effort. The horse shifts his weight to the offside, cocking the near hind hoof so that the hip muscle relaxes, and you take advantage of the relaxation to brush deeper into the crevice where the thigh meets the belly, a place that is often missed and where sweat can accumulate. You use the corner of the brush, where the bristles are shorter, to work into this crevice with a series of small, precise strokes, and you are rewarded with a final puff of dust that signals the completion of the area. Now you move to the near foreleg. The legs are groomed with the same dandy brush, but with a softer touch, because the bones and tendons lie close to the surface and are easily irritated by harsh brushing. You crouch down beside the horse, resting on one knee in the straw, and you begin at the top of the leg, just below the elbow. The brush strokes are short and downward, following the direction of the hair from the knee to the fetlock, and use only the weight of the brush itself, not pressing in with your hand. The hair on the legs is short and lies very flat, and the dust that comes away is a fine silty powder that clings to the bristles in a thin film. You clean the brush frequently, scraping it across the metal comb after every 3 or 4 strokes, because the leg dust is sticky and tends to clog the bristles if left to accumulate. The pastern, the sloping area just above the hoof, receives particular care. You brush it lightly, almost tickling the hair with the tips of the bristles, and you check for any small cuts or abrasions as you do so, finding none. The coronet, the soft band where the hair meets the hoof, is brushed with a single gentle stroke that follows the curve of the hoof wall, and then the leg is done. You stand up, brushing the straw from your knee, and you move around to the offside to repeat everything you have just done. The offside of the horse is a mirror of the near side, and yet it is also different, because the horse is not perfectly symmetrical, and neither are you. You begin at the offside of the neck, standing with your body in a slightly different position to accommodate the lantern light that now falls over your shoulder instead of onto your work. The strokes are the same long sweeps, the cleaning rhythm the same steady scrape, and the dust rises in the same pale clouds. The horse, accustomed to the routine, barely reacts as you work around to his off shoulder, his off flank, his off flank. His head remains low, his eyes half closed, and the only movement he makes is the occasional lazy flick of an ear or the slow swish of his tail. The tail itself you will attend to later, with a comb and a great deal of patience, but for now you simply brush the dust from the dock, the bony base of the tail, using short, careful strokes that do not pull at the long hairs. The off hind quarter is groomed with the same firm pressure as the near, and the off hind leg is crouched over with the same gentle, attentive touch. When you finally straighten up, the dandy brush is heavy with dust, its bristles matted and grey, and you clean it for the last time with a particularly vigorous scrape across the metal comb, then tap it against your boot until no more dust falls. You set the brush and the metal comb on the shelf, side by side, and you take a step back to survey your work. The horse's coat is now completely transformed. The rough, tufted look that the currycomb produced has been smoothed down into a sleek, even surface that gleams softly in the lantern light. The chestnut color is rich and deep, with subtle variations of shade that run like currents through the hair, darker along the spine, lighter on the flanks, a flash of pale gold on the muzzle. The dust that coated the horse has been transferred to the straw at your feet, where it lies in a fine grey layer, and to your own clothes, which are powdered with a thin film of pale dust that you will brush off before you sleep. You take the dandy brush one more time and use it on yourself, sweeping it down the front of your dolman and the thighs of your breeches with quick, efficient strokes. The dust billows away from the wool and joins the general haze in the air, and you feel cleaner, lighter. Then you hang the brush back on its leather loop, and you stand for a moment with your hands on your hips, breathing deeply. The air in the stall is thick and warm, and it smells of clean horse, of rice root bristles, of the faint metallic tang of the currycomb, and of the straw that has absorbed the dust of the day. The lantern continues its quiet hiss, and the flame has not flickered once, as if it too is settled into the rhythm of the evening. The horse, now sleek and smooth, turns his head and looks at you with one dark, liquid eye. He blinks slowly, the long lashes sweeping down and up, and then he nuzzles at your empty hand, perhaps looking for a treat, perhaps simply offering a gesture of companionship. You have nothing to give him but the flat of your palm, which you press against the soft skin of his muzzle, feeling the warmth and the velvet texture and the gentle puff of his breath. You leave your hand there for a long moment, and then you step away, because the grooming is not yet finished. The mane and tail, those long and flowing parts of him that give a hussar's horse his distinctive silhouette, are still tangled and dusty, and they will need the attention of the wide-toothed comb. But that is the work of the next chapter of the evening, and for now you allow yourself a brief pause, a quiet interval in which you simply stand in the stall and listen to the slow, peaceful sounds of a horse at rest. The dandy brush hangs once more from its leather loop on the wall, its bristles clean and dry and ready for the next evening, and the metal currycomb rests beside it, its teeth free of the grey dust that has now settled into the straw underfoot. The horse's coat lies smooth and flat, each hair aligned with its neighbour, and the chestnut colour glows with a deep, quiet warmth in the lantern light. You run your palm down the curve of his neck, feeling the sleekness that the brushing has created, and your hand comes away clean, carrying only the faint, pleasant oiliness of a healthy coat. The next bars of the grooming is a slower, more delicate task, one that requires a different tool and a different kind of patience, because the mane and tail are the long, flowing parts of the horse that tangle easily in the wind and collect the dust of the road in their coarse strands. You turn to the shelf and take down the comb that hangs there, a wide-toothed comb made of pale horn, its surface polished to a smooth, creamy translucence by years of use. The teeth are set wide apart, each one tapering to a blunt point, and the back of the comb is thick and curved to fit the grip of your fingers. The horn is cool to the touch, and it warms slowly as you hold it, absorbing the heat of your palm. You begin with the mane. The mane of a hussar's horse is traditionally kept long and falls to the right side of the neck, a cascade of hair that flows from the crest down to the shoulder, and over the months it has grown thick and heavy, with strands that are as long as your forearm. You approach the horse's head, stepping close to his shoulder on the left side, and you reach up to part the mane with your fingers. The hair is coarse and slightly wavy, with a texture that is different from the fine hair of the coat, and it is being tossed by the wind into a series of loose tangles and small knots. You do not pull at these knots. Instead, you take hold of a small section of the mane near the poll, the top of the head between the ears, and you separate it from the rest with your fingers, working slowly so that the hairs slide apart without resistance. The section is no wider than 2 fingers, a manageable bundle that you can comb through from bottom to top, and you hold it in your left hand while you position the comb at the very ends of the strands. Combing a mane is a process that moves against the usual direction of grooming. You start at the bottom of the tangle and work your way upward, releasing the snarls inch by inch. You bring the comb to the tips of the hair and draw it downward in a short, gentle stroke, the teeth passing through the last few inches with a soft, whispery sound. The tips are often the most tangled part because they whip in the wind and catch on the collar of the police and the edge of the saddle, and the comb encounters a slight resistance here. A faint tug that you feel as a subtle vibration in the horn. You do not force the comb through. You let it stop, then withdraw it, then apply it again to the same spot, working the teeth gently into the tangle from the side until the strands begin to separate. The sound is a quiet click-click as the horn teeth pass over one another, and the light catches the tiny dust particles that are released from the hair, a fine, almost invisible spray that drifts away into the golden haze of the stool. When the ends are smooth and free of knots, you move the comb a few inches higher up the section and repeat the process, combing from that point downward, so that each pass incorporates the newly detangled ends and works on the next level of snarls. You work your way up the section gradually, combing and recombing, and the hair under your fingers grows softer and more pliable with each stroke. The sound changes as the tangles release. It becomes a smoother, more continuous hiss, like water running over polished stone, and the comb begins to glide through the full length of the hair without catching. When the section is completely smooth from root to tip, you lay it flat against the neck and move on to the next section, parting the mane again with your fingers to isolate a new bundle of hair. You repeat the entire sequence, starting at the tips and working upward, and the rhythm of the work becomes a kind of slow, measured breathing, your own breath matching the steady patience of your hands. The horse stands perfectly still during all of this, his head lowered and his eyes half closed, and occasionally he lets out a long, deep sigh that flutters the loose strands of mane near his withers. The only other sound is the tiny hiss of the lantern and the soft creak of the timber walls as the stable cools in the night air. The mane has a natural parting that has developed over the months, a line along the crest where the hair divides, and you follow this parting as you work, taking sections from the thickest part of the mane first and then moving to the edges. The hair near the withers is shorter and finer, and it requires less combing, but you treat it with the same slow care, drawing the comb through those shorter strands until they lie flat and even. You encounter a small knot near the middle of the mane, a tangled cluster of hair that has wrapped around itself into a tight, hard ball. You stop and examine it in the lantern light, turning it over in your fingers to see how the strands are twisted. Then you use the tip of the comb, the very end of one tooth, to pick at the knot gently, loosening a single hair at a time. It is slow work, and you do not hurry. The knot gives way gradually, the strands slipping free one by one, and after a few minutes, the last tangle releases and the hair falls straight again. You comb through the area several times to ensure that no hidden snarls remain, and then you continue on to the next section. As you work your way down the mane, you periodically stop to clean the comb. The teeth collect a small amount of loose hair and a fine waxy residue that comes from the horse's skin, and you pick this away with your fingernails, rolling it into a small ball that you drop into the straw. Then you resume combing and the clean teeth pass through the hair with renewed ease. The mane, now partially combed, begins to take on a sleek, flowing appearance, the strands lying in gentle waves that catch the light and gleam with the deep copper tones of the chestnut coat. The hair is thick and heavy, and when you lift a section and let it fall, it drops back against the neck with a soft, solid weight, a sensation that speaks of health and good feeding and many quiet evenings like this one. The forelock, the fringe of hair that falls between the horse's eyes, receives its own careful attention. The forelock is shorter than the mane, but just as prone to tangles because it hangs over the sensitive skin of the forehead and blows into the horse's eyes in a strong wind. You stand in front of the horse, facing him directly, and you take the forelock in your hand, lifting it away from his face. The hair is softer here, almost silky, and the tangles are fewer and more easily undone. You comb the forelock with very short, delicate strokes, starting at the tips and working upward, and the comb makes a barely audible sound as it passes through the fine strands. The horse blinks at you, his large eyes reflecting the lantern flame as two tiny, warm points of light, and you see your own silhouette in the dark pools of his pupils, a small, shadowy figure holding a comb. When the forelock is smooth, you lay it back against his forehead and use your fingers to arrange it so that it falls evenly between his eyes, a neat curtain of hair that frames his face. Now you turn your attention to the tail. The tail is a far more substantial task than the mane, because the hair is longer and coarser and the tangles are deeper, and because the tail is a part of the horse that he can swish and flick and use to defend himself against flies, which means it has a life of its own. You move to stand at the horse's hind quarters, positioning yourself slightly to the left side so that you are not directly behind him, a habit of safety that has become second nature. The tail reaches almost to the hocks, a thick dark cascade of hair that is the same chestnut color as the coat, but with streaks of lighter flaxen tones running through it. You lift the tail carefully, cradling the heavy mass in both hands, and you feel the surprising weight of it, the dense accumulation of thousands of individual strands that together form a single flowing unit. You separate a small portion of the tail from the rest, a section about the width of your thumb, and you hold it firmly near the dock, the bony base where the tail attaches to the body, to avoid pulling on the skin. Combing the tail follows the same principle as the mane. You start at the bottom and work your way up. But the tail hairs are longer, often reaching all the way to the ground when the horse is standing still, so you have to lift the section higher to bring the ends within reach. You drape the section over your left forearm, letting the tips hang down near your hand, and you apply the comb to the last few inches of hair. The comb enters the tail with a soft, scratchy sound, and the first stroke meets immediate resistance, a series of small knots that have formed where the ends of the hairs have whipped against the horse's legs and the straw and the low bushes along the road. You work the comb gently, using the same short downward strokes that you used on the mane, and you pause whenever you feel a tangle, withdrawing the comb and then reinserting it at a slightly different angle. The process is repetitive and slow, and the minutes stretch out as you stand there, the only sounds the steady whisper of the horn teeth through the hair and the occasional contented stamp of a hoof in the straw. The tail contains more than just tangles. There are also bits of straw and hay and the occasional tiny burr that has lodged itself deep in the hair. As you comb, these foreign objects come loose and fall to the straw, and you pick them out with your fingers and drop them away. One particularly stubborn burr, a round, spiky seed pod that has wrapped several strands of hair around itself, requires you to stop and work it free with the tip of the comb, much as you did with the knot in the mane. You tease the hair away from the burr strand by strand, and the horse flicks his tail once, a lazy, automatic movement, then settles again. When the burr finally comes free, you toss it into the corner and resume combing, your fingers now moving with an even more practiced patience. You work your way up the section of tail, combing and untangling, and the hair beneath your hands becomes smoother and more lustrous with each pass. The sound of the comb changes as the tangles disappear, shifting from a scratchy, irregular noise to a smooth, continuous rustle. When the section is completely tangle-free, you let it fall back with the rest of the tail and take up a new section, separating it from the mass with the same careful fingers. The tail, like the mane, has a natural flow, a way that the hairs want to lie, and you follow that flow as you work, combing in the direction that the hair grows. The process is slow and methodical, and you lose track of how many sections you have combed, how many minutes have passed. The only measure of time is the gradual lightening of the tail as the dust and debris are removed and the hair begins to gleam with the deep, silky sheen of good health. Eventually you reach the last section of the tail, the outer layer that forms the visible surface, and you comb it with particular care because this is the part that will catch the light when the horse moves. You draw the comb through the full length of the hair in long, sweeping strokes, each stroke beginning at the dock and traveling all the way to the tips, and the comb glides through without a single catch, a testament to the patience of the last hour. You repeat these full-length strokes several times until the tail flows like dark water through your fingers, every strand aligned and smooth. Then you use the comb to gently shape the tail, lifting it slightly at the base so that it falls naturally, and you run your hand down the full length of it one last time, feeling the cool, silky texture and the surprising weight. You stand back and look at the horse. The mane lies flat and shining against the right side of his neck, the waves of hair cascading like a waterfall of burnished copper, and the forelock is a smooth, even curtain between his calm, dark eyes. The tail hangs heavy and straight, reaching nearly to the ground, and it sways ever so slightly as the horse shifts his weight, a slow, pendulous movement that catches the lantern light and throws off subtle glints of gold and amber. The horse himself is a picture of quiet contentment, his coat sleek, his feet clean, his long hair tangle-free and shining, and you feel a deep, quiet pride in the work of your hands, a pride that is not loud or boastful, but simply the satisfaction of a task done slowly and well. You clean the horn comb one final time, picking away the small accumulation of loose hair and waxy residue, and then you wipe it on a clean corner of the rack that hangs from the wall. The comb goes back onto its hook, and you stretch your arms above your head, feeling the pull in your shoulders and the slight stiffness in your fingers from holding the comb for so long. The stall is utterly quiet now, the only sounds the soft hiss of the lantern and the deep, slow breathing of the horse and the occasional distant hoot of an owl somewhere out in the darkness beyond the thatch. The small high window is a square of absolute black, the stars invisible now, perhaps hidden by a cloud, or simply faded into the deeper darkness of the late night. You lean your shoulder against the wooden partition and cross your arms, looking at the horse, and you realize that you are no longer thinking of the day behind you or the day ahead. Your mind is as empty and still as the surface of the water in the bucket, reflecting nothing but the quiet glow of the lantern and the patient, peaceful shape of the horse you have cared for since the sun went down. The horn comb hangs once more from its hook, and the long, flowing strands of the mane and tail have been smoothed into shining cascades that fall with the weight of well-tended health. The air in the stall is still now, the floating dust having settled completely into the straw, and the lantern continues its quiet, steady glow, the flame a constant small sun in the enclosed world of timber and thatch. The horse stands with the contentment of a creature that has been thoroughly groomed, his coat sleek, his feet clean, his long hair untangled, and yet there is still one more step before the grooming can be called complete, a step that involves water, and a soft touch, and the careful inspection of every part of him that the brushes and combs cannot reach. You stretch your arms once, feeling the pleasant looseness in your shoulders, and then you pick up the empty wooden bucket from its corner. The bucket is made of pine staves bound with iron hoops, and its handle is a smooth, worn rope that fits comfortably in your grip. You lift it by the rope and carry it out of the stall, down the aisle, and through the open stable door into the night. Outside, the world is cool and dark and silent. The stars that were so bright earlier have dimmed behind a thin veil of high cloud, and the air has the crisp, clean smell of cold earth and distant wood smoke. The stone trough stands near the stable wall, a long rectangular basin made of grey fieldstone fed by a wooden pipe that runs from a spring somewhere up the hill. Water trickles from the pipe in a continuous gentle flow, a sound that is like a whisper of silk, and the surface of the water in the trough shivers with the movement, reflecting the faint glow of the stars as a scattering of pale pinpricks. You set the bucket down on the edge of the trough and let the cool water run into it, filling it slowly. The water is clear and cold, and you can see the pebbles at the bottom of the trough through its depth, smooth and round and dark. When the bucket is 3/4 full, you lift it out, the water sloshing gently against the wooden sides, and you carry it back into the stable, the weight of it pulling on your arm with a pleasant grounding heaviness. Back in the stall, you set the bucket down near the horse's head, careful not to spill any on the straw. The water settles into stillness, its surface becoming a dark mirror that reflects the lantern flame as a small, wavering point of gold. You go to the shelf and take down a soft sponge, a natural sponge from the sea, its surface full of tiny holes, and its texture plush and yielding when dry. Beside the sponge, There is a clean linen cloth, one of the squares that you use for a dozen different purposes in the stable, and you take that as well. You dip the sponge into the bucket, holding it under the water until it grows heavy and saturated, and then you lift it out and squeeze it gently with both hands so that the excess water runs back into the bucket in a thin, musical stream. The sponge is now damp and cool, not dripping, and it feels soft and comforting in your palm. You turn to the horse and stand in front of him, facing his head. He looks at you with his calm, dark eyes, and his ears swivel forward in mild curiosity, aware that something different is about to happen. You raise the sponge to his face, moving slowly so that he can see it coming, and you begin with the area around his left eye. The skin here is thin and delicate, with fine, almost invisible hairs, and in the inner corner of the eye there is a small accumulation of the crusts that form from dust and the natural moisture of the eye during a long day. You press the sponge very gently against the corner, letting the dampness soften the crusts, and then you wipe outward with a slow, careful motion, moving away from the eye so that no debris is drawn into it. The crusts dissolve and lift away, leaving the skin clean and slightly darker where the moisture has dampened the hair. The horse blinks once, a slow, deliberate closing and opening of his lids, and you see the clear, healthy pink of the conjunctiva, the inner lining of the eyelid, which shows no sign of redness or irritation. You repeat the process on the right eye, using a fresh part of the sponge, and the same small crusts come away, revealing the clean, soft skin beneath. You then wipe the area just below each eye, where the faint, dark traces of tear stains have formed, and you use a light, dabbing motion to lift the stains without rubbing harshly. From the eyes, you move to the nostrils. The horse's nostrils are large and soft and mobile, constantly flaring slightly with each breath, and the rims are lined with a fine, velvety skin that can collect dust and dried mucus. You fold the sponge to a clean surface and bring it to the left nostril, wiping the outer rim with a single gentle stroke that follows the curve of the nostril from top to bottom. The horse exhales sharply once, a puff of warm air that ruffles your sleeve, and then he stands still, accepting the attention. You clean the right nostril in the same way, and then you use the very tip of the sponge to gently wipe the inner edge, where the skin is even softer, removing a tiny trace of dried moisture that had gathered there. The horse snorts once, a soft, low sound that is not a protest, but simply a clearing of the air passages, and then he lowers his head a fraction, as if inviting you to continue. The muzzle comes next. The muzzle is the soft, hairless part of the nose and upper lip, covered with short, fine, almost invisible hairs that feel like velvet under your fingers. It is one of the most sensitive parts of the horse's body, rich with nerve endings, and you handle it with the utmost gentleness. You pass the damp sponge over the muzzle in a single, slow sweep, from just below the nostrils down to the upper lip, and you feel the horse's lips twitch slightly under the sponge, a reflexive movement that is not a flinch, but a kind of acknowledgement. You clean the corners of the mouth where the lips meet, and you wipe away a small bit of dried grass that has stuck there from his last mouthful of hay. Then you turn the sponge over and pass it once more over the whole muzzle, a final, soft stroke that leaves the skin clean and slightly cool. Now you attend to the ears. You stand slightly to the side, not directly in front, and you reach up to the left ear. The ear is long and pointed, lined with fine silky hair on the outside and almost bare on the inside, where the skin is pink and delicate. You do not use the sponge on the inside of the ear because you must be careful not to let water drip into the ear canal, where it could cause irritation or infection. Instead, you fold the sponge into a small, precise pad and wipe only the outer surface of the ear, the convex back and the edges, removing the fine dust that has settled there. The horse flicks his ear away from your hand once, then lets it relax back, and you finish the cleaning with a gentle stroke that follows the curve of the ear from base to tip. The right ear receives the same treatment, and you notice a small tick, no larger than a grain of rice, clinging to the hair near the base of the ear. You pick it off with your fingernails, crushing it between your thumb and forefinger, and then you wipe the spot with the sponge to clean away any residue. The horse seems to appreciate this, leaning his head very slightly into your hand, and you pause to scratch the spot with your fingertip, a small reward for his patience. With the face now clean, you set the sponge aside and take up the clean linen cloth. You dip the cloth into the bucket, wetting it thoroughly, and then you wring it out until it is just damp, the water squeezed away until the cloth feels cool and dry to the touch, but still carries a hint of moisture. This cloth is for the more sensitive areas of the horse's body, the places where the skin is thinnest and most private. You move to the horse's hindquarters, standing once again slightly to the side, and you lift the tail gently with your free hand, draping it over your forearm so that you have access to the dock. The dock is the bony base of the tail, covered with short, coarse hair and soft skin, and it is an area that can collect sweat and debris. You pass the damp cloth over the dock in a single, slow wipe, following the direction of the hair, and the cloth comes away with a faint grey smudge of dust. You rinse the cloth in the bucket, wring it out again, and repeat the wipe, this time using a clean section of the cloth, until the skin is fresh and clean. You then attend to the sheath, the fold of skin on the underside of the belly that protects the horse's most sensitive organ. This is a task that requires patience and a calm, matter-of-fact approach, because the horse must feel completely at ease. You stand beside the horse, facing his belly, and you speak to him in a low, steady murmur, telling him what you are doing in words that have no real meaning but carry the tone of reassurance. The horse shifts his weight slightly, then relaxes, and you use the damp cloth to wipe the outer surfaces of the sheath, with gentle, unhurried strokes, removing the natural smegma and any dried sweat that has accumulated there. You do not probe or intrude. You simply clean the external folds with the same care you would use on any other part of his body, and the horse accepts it with the same quiet trust he has shown all evening. When you are finished, you rinse the cloth one final time and set it aside to be washed properly later. All through this washing, you have been talking to the horse, a soft, one-sided conversation that has filled the silence of the stall with the sound of your voice. You tell him about the road you traveled today, the stretch of it that ran along the river where the willows trailed their branches in the water, and the way the sun caught the dust and turned it into a golden haze on the hilltop. You tell him that the oats in the feed room smell particularly sweet this week, and that the farrier will be coming on Thursday to check his shoes, and that the grey horse in the next stall was neighing this morning about something or other. You tell him that he is a good horse, a patient horse, a horse worth more than all the gold braid on your dolman, and your voice is low and steady and carries no expectation of an answer. The horse listens with his ears, one swiveled back towards you and one forward, and his breathing remains slow and deep, and you know that the sound of your voice is as familiar to him as the sound of the stirrup leather creaking or the rustle of the saddle blanket. Now comes the final inspection, the running of your hands over every part of his body to check for anything that the grooming might have missed. You start at the head, placing your palms flat on either side of his face, just below the eyes, and you slide your hands down over the cheekbones and the jaw, feeling the hard, smooth bone beneath the skin. The jaw muscles are relaxed, not tight, and the temperature of the skin is even and warm. You move your hands to the neck, starting at the pole and working your way down the left side, your palms tracing the long, thick muscle that runs from behind the ear to the shoulder. The muscle is firm but pliable, and there is no heat or swelling along its length, no sign of strain or injury. You check the groove of the jugular vein, pressing lightly with your fingertips to feel the steady pulse, and then you cross over to the right side of the neck and repeat the process, finding the same healthy, even warmth. Your hands move to the shoulders next, sliding over the broad, sloping muscles that power the front legs. You press gently into the tissue, feeling for any knots or tightness, but the muscle gives easily under your fingers, the texture smooth and resilient. You run your palms down the front of each foreleg, from the elbow to the knee, feeling the hard, flat tendons that run like cables down the back of the leg, and you find them cool and tight, with no swelling or heat. The knees are bony and prominent, and you encircle each one with your fingers, feeling the joint capsule, which is cool and dry, the skin sliding freely over the bone beneath. You continue down the cannon bones, the long, straight shafts between the knee and the fetlock, and you press your thumbs along the length of them, checking for any hint of splints or bumps. There are none. The fetlock joints are next, and you flex each one gently, feeling the smooth, unhindered range of motion, and you cup the pasterns in your palms, feeling the soft, springy tissue that cushions each step. You move to the barrel, the great curve of the rib cage. You stand on the near side and place your palm flat against the shoulder, then run it slowly down the side of the chest, over the ribs, which you can feel as smooth, hard arcs beneath the skin. The horse's breathing lifts and lowers your hand with a steady oceanic rhythm, and you count the breaths, slow and even, perhaps 8 or 10 to the minute. There is no flinching, no tensing of the skin as you pass your hand over the belly, which is soft and slightly rounded, the skin sliding loosely over the abdominal muscles. You check the flanks, where the hair is fine and the skin is thin enough to show the faint shadows of the underlying structures, and you find them cool and dry, with no sign of the spasms that would indicate colic. You repeat the entire process on the offside, your hands moving with the same slow, methodical care, and you find everything exactly as it should be. You run your hands down each hind leg, starting at the hip and moving down the great, powerful muscles of the thigh and gaskin. The muscles are dense and heavy, warm from the blood that circulates through them, but there is no excessive heat, no swelling that would suggest a strain. You feel the stifle joint, which is the equivalent of the human knee, a complex hinge that is cool and tight under the skin. You move down to the hock, that sharp, angular joint that is so prone to injury, and you examine it with particular care, running your fingertips around the bony prominences and checking the small, fluid-filled bursa at the point of the hock. The skin there is slightly thickened from years of lying on straw, but it is cool and free of swelling. You continue down the cannon bone of the hind leg, which is longer and flatter than the foreleg cannon, and you check the tendons, which are broad and flat and feel like taut bands under your fingers. The hind fetlocks and pasterns receive the same gentle flexion and palpation, and you find them all in good order. Finally, you run your hand along the spine, starting at the withers and moving slowly down the long ridge of the backbone to the croup. Each vertebra is a small, hard knob beneath the skin, and you press gently on either side of the spine, feeling the long muscles that run parallel to it, the muscles that carry the saddle and the rider. There is no soreness, no heat, no tension anywhere along the back. The horse arches his neck slightly when you press near the withers, a sign that the pressure feels good, like a massage, and you spend an extra moment there, working your thumb in small circles into the muscle until the horse sighs and drops his head even lower. You stand up straight, your inspection complete. Your hands have traveled every inch of the horse, from the soft muzzle to the heavy tail, and they have found nothing but health and quiet strength. The horse stands perfectly still, his head low, his eyes half closed, his whole body radiating a calm, contented warmth that fills the stall like the glow of the lantern. You take the bucket of now slightly cloudy water and carry it outside to empty it onto the grass, and then you refill it with fresh, cold water from the trough and bring it back to the stall, setting it in the corner where the horse can drink if he wishes. The night air has grown colder, and you can see your breath as a faint mist when you stand near the stable door, but inside the stall, the warmth of the horse and the lantern and the straw keeps the cold at bay. You return to the horse's side and place your hand on his neck one more time, feeling the slow, steady pulse of life beneath the skin, and you allow yourself a small, quiet moment of gratitude for the animal that carries you through the world and stands now in the straw, clean and sound and utterly at peace. The water bucket stands full and cool in the corner, its surface so still that it reflects the lantern flame as a perfect inverted teardrop of gold, and the horse, having been washed and inspected, now waits with the quiet patience of an animal that knows the evening routine has one more important stage to reach. You have felt every inch of his body with your palms, and your hands carried a memory of his warmth and the smoothness of his coat, a tactile echo that lingers even as you step away from his side. The next task is the feeding, the replenishment of the energy that the long road has spent, and it is a task that brings its own particular set of sounds and smells and slow, deliberate movements. You pick up the leather feed bucket from its hook near the stall door, a sturdy container with a rope handle and a rim reinforced with stitched rawhide, and you carry it with you as you walk down the aisle towards the feed room at the far end of the stable. The aisle is dark except for the faint glow that spills from your own stall, and the other horses are invisible in their boxes, their breathing deep and regular, punctuated now and then by a soft, sleepy snort or the rustle of straw as one of them shifts in the night. Your boots make a soft crunching sound on the packed earth floor, a steady, slow rhythm that marks your passage along the length of the building. The feed-room door is a heavy slab of oak, its surface worn smooth in the center where countless hands have pushed it open over the years, and it swings inward on iron hinges that are kept well oiled and silent. The air that greets you as you step inside is different from the air in the stall, cooler and drier, and it carries a sweet, dusty fragrance that is the concentrated essence of the stable's heart. This is the smell of oats and barley and cured hay, of the dried herbs that are mixed into the feed to keep the horses healthy, of the old wood of the bins and the faint, clean scent of sacking and twine. The feed room is a small, square chamber with walls lined by wooden bins, each one labeled with a word written in chalk that has been smudged and rewritten many times. One bin holds oats, another holds chopped hay, a third contains bran, and there are smaller bins for the supplements and the medicinal herbs that you use only occasionally. Above the bins on a high shelf are stacked bundles of dried nettles and chamomile, their leaves rustling faintly when the door opens and the air moves. You set the leather bucket down on the flagstone floor and reach for the wooden scoop that hangs from a nail beside the oat bin. The scoop is a simple tool, carved from a single piece of beechwood, its bowl worn to a silky smoothness and its handle shaped to fit a hand. You lift the heavy lid of the oat bin, and the smell that rises is warm and nutty, the smell of the grain that has been grown in the fields and harvested and threshed and stored through the autumn and winter. The oats are pale gold, each grain a tiny, elongated oval with a fine crease down the center, and they rustle softly as you push the scoop into the pile. You measure out the oats with the care that comes from long practice, filling the scoop to the brim and then leveling it off with the side of your hand so that the amount is exactly right. This is not a guess. You know the capacity of the scoop and you know the needs of your horse, a formula that has been calculated over weeks and months of riding and resting, of watching his weight and his energy and the shine of his coat. You pour the oats into the leather bucket and they fall with a light rattling sound like a small waterfall of tiny stones. You take a second scoop and a third until the bottom of the bucket is covered with a thick layer of grain that reaches halfway up the sides. The number of scoops is a fixed quantity, a constant in the variable world, and you count them silently to yourself, your lips moving just slightly. With the oats measured, you move to the bin that holds the chopped hay. This hay is different from the long, loose hay that fills the racks in the stalls. It has been cut into short lengths, no more than an inch or two, and it is mixed with a small amount of dried clover and the leaves of the common meadow grasses. The smell is sweeter than the oats, greener, carrying a hint of the summer fields where the hay was cut and dried under the sun. You take a handful of the chopped hay, your fingers sinking into the soft, fragrant mass, and you sprinkle it over the oats in the bucket, spreading it evenly so that it forms a layer on top. The hay clings to the oats and will mix with them when the horse eats, encouraging him to chew slowly and thoroughly. Next, you go to the bran bin. Bran is the outer husk of the wheat grain, a light, flaky substance that is pale brown and feels almost like fine sawdust between your fingers. You add a small measure of bran to the bucket, just enough to help the digestion and to add bulk to the feed without adding too much weight. The bran drifts down like a fine powder and settles into the spaces between the oats and the hay, and the bucket now contains a layered mixture of grains and fibers that looks plain, but carries all the nutrition the horse will need to rebuild his strength through the night. You pause for a moment, looking into the bucket, and you add one more thing, a small pinch of dried chamomile from the shelf, the tiny, yellow-scented flowers crumbling between your fingers as you scatter them over the top. The chamomile is not strictly necessary, but it has a calming effect and gives the feed a pleasant, slightly floral aroma that you enjoy. Then you lift the bucket by its rope handle and carry it out of the feed room, pulling the door closed behind you with a gentle click. Back in the stall, the horse has not moved. He stands exactly where you left him, his weight shifted onto 3 legs, his head low and his ears drooping with the deep relaxation of an animal that has been thoroughly groomed and handled with care. As you enter, however, his ears prick forward and his nostrils flare, catching the scent of the feed. He lifts his head and turns it towards you, and his eyes, which were half closed, open wider with a look of quiet interest. You cannot help but smile at this, a small, private expression, because the horse knows the sound of the feed bucket and the smell of the oats in the routine of the evening, and his anticipation is a simple, honest thing that needs no translation. You walk to the manger, a wooden box that is attached to the wall of the stall at chest height, its interior worn smooth by the rasping of tongues over many years. The manger is empty now, cleaned out after the morning feed, and you pour the contents of the leather bucket into it in a slow, steady stream. The oats and the chopped hay and the bran cascade into the box with a soft, rustling sound, the grains bouncing and settling, and the faint, sweet scent of the chamomile rises on the warm air of the stall. The horse steps forward, his hooves making a soft, deep sound in the straw, and he lowers his head to the manger. His muzzle hovers over the feed for a moment, the soft, velvety skin twitching as he snuffles of the unfamiliar addition of the chamomile, and then he begins to eat. The first sound is a soft, wet lipping as he gathers a mouthful of the mixture, his lips and teeth working with a practiced precision that sorts the oats from the hay and the bran. Then the chewing begins, and it is a sound that you have come to love, a steady, rhythmic grinding that is as soothing as the hiss of the lantern or the rustle of the straw. The horse's jaw moves in a slow, circular motion, the great molars at the back of his mouth crushing the oats and the hay into a soft, moist mass that he will swallow and digest through the long hours of the night. The sound is deep and regular, a crunching and grinding that has a kind of music to it, a low, percussive beat that fills the stall and makes the silence that surrounds it seem even deeper. You watch him eat for a while, leaning your shoulder against the wooden partition and crossing your arms over your chest. The horse is completely absorbed in his meal, his whole attention focused on the manger, and his ears are no longer drooping but are pricked forward, rotating slightly with each chew as if listening to the sound of his own eating. The muscles of his jaw bulge and relax, a slow, visible rhythm that you can see even in the dim lantern light. Occasionally he pauses and lifts his head, a few grains of oat falling from his lips back into the manger, and he chews with his head raised, looking at the wall or the window or nothing in particular, his eyes unfocused and dreamy. Then he lowers his head again and takes another mouthful, and the steady grinding resumes. The feed in the manger slowly decreases, the level sinking inch by inch, and the horse eats with the calm, unhurried pace of an animal that knows his food will not be taken away, and that the night is long and there is no need to rush. While he eats, you turn your attention to the water bucket. You had refilled it with fresh water after the washing, but you check it now to make sure the water is still clean and cool. The surface is unbroken, and when you dip your finger into it, the water is cold, carrying the chill of the spring from which it came. You lift the bucket by its rope handle and carry it to the iron hook that is set into the wall at the height of the horse's chest, a hook that you place there yourself so that the bucket would be easy for him to reach. You hang the bucket on the hook, making sure it sits level and steady, and the water shimmers slightly with the movement before settling back into stillness. The horse will drink when he is ready, after the feed is finished or perhaps during a pause, and you know that he will drink deeply because a horse needs a great deal of water after a day of work, and the hay and the oats will make him thirsty. Now it is time to attend to the bedding. The straw on the floor of the stall has been trampled and disturbed by the evening's activities, and although it is still mostly clean, there are patches where the dust from the grooming has settled, and where the horse has stood for a long time in one spot, pressing the straw flat. You leave the stall and walk to the hay barn, which is attached to the back of the stable, a large open space with a roof of thatch and walls of half-timbered wattle. The hay barn is dark, and you carry the lantern with you, its light picking out the stacked bales of straw and the piles of loose hay that rise like golden mountains towards the rafters. The smell here is even stronger than in the feed room, a deep, sweet, grassy scent that is almost overwhelming in its intensity, and the air is dry and still and slightly warm from the slow fermentation of the packed hay. You set the lantern on a high beam and take up the pitchfork that leans against the wall, a tool with a long ash handle and two curved tines of iron, polished by use to a dull silver gleam. You drive the tines into the side of a straw bale, feeling the resistance of the tightly packed stalks, and you lift a large fluffy forkful of straw. The stalks are long and golden, each one a hollow tube that glints in the lantern light, and they rustle and crackle softly as you carry them back to the stall. You lay the forkful of straw on the floor just inside the stall door, and then you return to the hay barn for a second forkful, and a third, until you have a good pile of fresh, clean straw ready to spread. The horse pauses in his eating to watch you, his jaws still working on a mouthful of oats, and then he turns back to the manger, satisfied that the activity is part of the normal routine. You take up the pitchfork again and begin to spread the fresh straw. You work from the edges of the stall inward, forking the straw into the corners and along the walls, where the horse rarely stands and where the old bedding is still dry and clean. You lift and scatter, the tines of the pitchfork combing through the stalks and laying them down in an even, springy layer. The sound is a soft, continuous rustle, like the whisper of wind through a field of ripe grain, and the golden stalks catch the lantern light and seem to glow with their own inner warmth. You spread the straw thicker in the center of the stall, where the horse will lie down, if he chooses to lie down, banking it up slightly against the walls to create a soft, insulating barrier against any draft that might find its way through the cracks in the timber. The old straw that was flattened or soiled, you fork aside, piling it in a corner near the door where you will later carry it out to the muck heap behind the stable, and the stall gradually transforms into a clean, fresh-smelling bed that looks as inviting as any mattress stuffed with feathers. When the new straw is spread to your satisfaction, you lean the pitchfork against the wall and take a moment to simply look at the stall. The floor is deep and golden, the straw lying in thick, even layers that will cushion the horse's weight and keep him warm through the cold hours of the night. The walls are lined with the clean, pale stalks, and the manger is still half full of feed, and the water bucket hangs on its hook, and the horse stands in the middle of it all, his head lowered to the manger, his body a solid, dark shape against the glowing background of the straw. The lantern burns on its hook, and the light it casts is warm and yellow, and the whole scene is one of such simple, perfect peace that you feel a kind of quiet reverence settle over you, a sense that this small square space contains everything that matters in the world. The horse finishes his oats. The last grains have been licked from the smooth wood of the manger, and he runs his tongue over the surface one more time, searching for any stray bits that might be hiding in the corners. Then he lifts his head and turns to the water bucket, his muzzle dipping into the cool, dark water. He drinks in long, slow draughts, his throat moving with each swallow, and the sound of the drinking is a soft, rhythmic gulping that is as soothing as the crunching of the feed was. You watch the water level in the bucket drop slightly, and you make a mental note to refill it before you finally settle down for the night. The horse drinks his fill and then lifts his head, water dripping from his muzzle in a fine spray, and he licks his lips with a long pink tongue. He turns to look at you, his dark eyes calm and satisfied, and then he lowers his head to the fresh straw and begins to lip at a few loose stalks, not eating, just exploring the new bedding with his sensitive, mobile lips. You step forward and run your hand down his neck one more time, feeling the warmth and the smoothness of the coat and the slow, steady pulse of life beneath. The horse leans into your touch just a little, and then he goes back to investigating the straw. You take the leather feed bucket and carry it back to the feed room, hanging it on its hook so that it will be ready for the morning, and you close the feed room door and return to the stall. The evening's tasks are almost complete now, and the only thing that remains is the final settling in, the quiet vigil that you keep each night before you allow yourself to rest. You sit down on the wooden stool in the corner of the stall, the one you placed there months ago for this very purpose, and you lean your back against the rough-sawn timber of the wall. The stool is hard and unyielding, but you are used to it, and the straw is deep and soft at your feet. You cross your arms and let your head rest against the wall, and you watch the horse as he moves slowly around the stall, nosing at the fresh straw, taking another sip of water, and then finally settling into a standing doze with one hind leg cocked and his head low. The sounds of the stable are the sounds of the deep night now, the slow, rhythmic breathing of the horse, the occasional soft stamp of a hoof on the straw, the distant, almost inaudible creak of a beam as the temperature drops outside. The lantern continues to burn, its oil reservoir still half full, and you know it will last until dawn if you let it. The small high window is a square of absolute black, and the world beyond the stable walls seems very far away, a distant memory that has no purchase in this small, warm space. Your own breathing begins to slow, matching the rhythm of the horses, and your eyelids grow heavy, the weight of the long day and the quiet work pressing down on you like a gentle hand. You are not asleep yet, but you are approaching the border of sleep, that soft, hazy threshold where thoughts become images and the line between waking and dreaming begins to blur. The last thing you see before your eyes close completely is the shape of the horse, solid and warm and content, standing in the golden straw with the lantern light playing over his coat, and the last thing you hear is the soft, steady sound of his chewing, a sound that will follow you down into the depths of rest. The last of the oats have disappeared from the manger, and the horse has licked the worn wood clean until it gleams faintly in the lantern light, his broad tongue leaving behind a damp, smooth surface that will dry by morning. He stands now with his head low, his muzzle hovering just above the fresh straw, and his breathing is slow and deep, the rhythm of a body that has been fed and watered and is now turning its attention inward toward rest. The water bucket hangs on its iron hook, its surface once again still after the horse's long, thirsty draughts, and the level has dropped by several inches, a reduction you note with a quiet satisfaction, because a horse that drinks well is a horse that will recover well from the exertions of the day. You rise from the wooden stool where you have been sitting, your muscles slightly stiff from the brief stillness, and you pick up the pitchfork that leans against the wall, its ash handle smooth and cool in your grip. The final preparation of the bed is a task that requires a careful eye and a gentle hand, because the horse will spend the night in this stall, and the quality of his rest depends on the depth and the dryness and the arrangement of the straw beneath his feet. You begin by walking slowly around the perimeter of the stall, the tines of the pitchfork held low and parallel to the ground, and you scan the bedding for any patches that have become soiled or flattened beyond recovery. The horse has been standing in the same general area for most of the evening, near the manger and the water bucket, and the straw there has been pressed down by his weight into a dense, compacted mat. You slide the pitchfork under this matted straw, the tines slipping easily between the stalks, and you lift it in a single heavy forkful. The soiled straw is darker than the fresh damp in places where the water from his muzzle has dripped, and it carries a faint earthy smell that is not unpleasant but is best removed. You carry the forkful to the corner near the door where you have been piling the old bedding, and you drop it onto the growing heap, the stalks tumbling and settling with a soft rustle. Then you return to the stall and continue the inspection, working your way around the horse with the slow, methodical pace of someone who has all the time in the world. In the far corner, near the small high window, you find a patch of straw that has been completely untouched, still fluffy and golden, and you leave it in place, because the horse may choose to lie down there later, and the clean straw will provide a soft, insulating cushion. You fork away a few more areas where the dust from the grooming has settled into a grey film on the stalks, and then you turn your attention to the spots where the horse has urinated during the earlier part of the evening, before you began the grooming. These spots are easy to identify. The straw is darker and clumped together, and the smell is sharper, more ammoniac. You remove all of this soiled bedding with the pitchfork, being careful to lift it cleanly so that the wetness does not spread to the dry straw around it. You carry each forkful out of the stall and add it to the pile, and then you go to the hay barn one more time to fetch fresh straw to replace what you have taken away. The hay barn is dark and still, and the lantern, which you have left hanging on its hook in the stall, sends only a faint, diffuse glow through the open doorway, just enough to outline the shapes of the stacked bales and the mounds of loose hay. You know the layout of the barn by heart, and you find the fresh straw bale without needing to see it clearly, your hands guiding you to the rough, twine-bound rectangle. You cut the twine with the small knife you carry in your belt, a simple folding blade with a horn handle, and you pull away several thick flakes of the compressed straw. Each flake is a dense, layered slab that separates into a cascade of individual stalks when you lift it, and you carry 2 of these flakes back to the stall, one under each arm, the straw rustling and crackling with every step. You drop them onto the floor of the stall and then return to the barn for 2 more, until you have enough fresh material to rebuild the areas you have cleared. With the new straw piled in a loose heap near the door, you take up the pitchfork once more and begin the careful work of spreading it. You start at the back wall, under the window, and you fork the straw in a wide, sweeping motion that sends the stalks sailing through the air in a golden arc, landing softly on the floor and overlapping the existing bedding. You work your way forward, covering the bare patches and building up the depth of the bed until the entire floor of the stall is a uniform, thick layer of straw that reaches halfway up the horse's hooves. You pay special attention to the area where the horse will most likely lie down, a space in the center of the stall that is away from the walls and the door and the manger, and you pile the straw a little deeper there, creating a slight mound that will support his body and cushion his joints when he lowers himself to the ground. You smooth the surface with the back of the pitchfork, dragging the tines gently over the top to level out any lumps and to create an even, inviting bed that looks as comfortable as any feather mattress in a farmhouse. The horse watches all of this with his calm, dark eyes, his head turned slightly to follow your movements. He has seen you spread straw 100 times, and the activity is as familiar to him as the sound of your voice or the creak of the saddle leather. When you are finished, you lean the pitchfork against the wall once more and brush the loose straw from your sleeves and the front of your dolman. Then you step back and survey the stall, and what you see is a space that has been transformed by your hands into a sanctuary of warmth and comfort. The straw is deep and golden and even, the walls are lined with clean stalks, the manger is empty and clean, the water bucket is full, and the horse stands in the center of it all, like the calm, steady heart of a small, private universe. Now there is a moment that you have witnessed many times, but that never loses its quiet significance. The horse, having eaten and drunk and watched you prepare his bed, begins to show the signs of an animal that is considering lying down. He shifts his weight from one hind leg to the other, and then he walks a slow, small circle in the deep straw, his hooves making a soft, muffled, crunching sound. He stops, lowers his head, and sniffs at the bedding, his nostrils flaring as he takes in the scent of the fresh stalks. Then he bends his knees, a slow, deliberate folding of his forelegs, and he sinks down onto the straw with a heavy, gentle motion that is at once powerful and fragile. His hindquarters follow, the great muscles of his haunches lowering to the ground, and then he rolls onto his side with a deep, gusty sigh, his legs extending out and his belly rising and falling with the rhythm of his breath. For a few moments he lies fully on his side, his head resting on the straw, his eyes closed, and he looks as peaceful as a foal asleep in a summer pasture. You stand perfectly still, not wanting to disturb him, and you feel a deep, quiet joy at the sight, because a horse lies down only when he feels completely safe, and this simple act is a gift of trust that you have earned through many evenings of patient care. The horse does not remain lying down for long. After a minute or two, he lifts his head, blinks his eyes, and then rolls back onto his belly, tucking his forelegs under his chest and pushing himself upright with a smooth, powerful surge of his hind legs. He stands up, shaking his body from head to tail so that the straw that clung to his coat flies off in a small, dusty cloud, and then he settles back into his usual standing doze, one hind leg cocked and his head low. The lying down was not a commitment to sleep, but rather a test of the bed, an expression of contentment, and you know that later in the night, when the stable is even darker and quieter, he may lie down again and sleep more deeply. For now, the standing rest is enough, and you turn your attention to the final small tasks that will secure the stall for the night. You walk to the stall door, a heavy half door of horizontal planks, and you check the latch. The latch is a simple wooden bar that slides into an iron bracket, and you lift it and lower it a few times to ensure it moves freely. Then you slide it firmly into place so that the door cannot swing open on its own. The top half of the door is open, as it has been all evening, to allow the air to circulate, but you decide to close it part way now that the temperature outside has dropped. You swing the top half shut, leaving a gap of perhaps 6 inches at the top, a compromise that keeps the warmth in while still allowing a gentle flow of fresh air. The hinges are silent, well oiled with the same mutton fat you used on the gate, and the door settles into place with a soft, solid thud that is reassuring in its finality. You check the lower half of the door as well, ensuring the latch is secure, and then you step back, satisfied that the stall is closed for the night. Next, you turn your attention to the small high window. The window is set into the wall about 7 feet above the ground, a square opening that is fitted with a wooden shutter on the inside. The shutter is currently open, allowing the cold night air to enter and keeping the stall from becoming too stuffy. But you know that the air will grow colder as the night deepens, and a draft directly onto the horse's back could chill him. You reach up, standing on your toes, and you swing the shutter partway closed, leaving a gap of a few inches so that the air can still move through, but not blow directly down onto the horse. The shutter is made of the same rough-sawn timber as the walls, and it creaks faintly as it moves, a small dry sound that seems very loud in the quiet of the stable. When you are satisfied with the position, you step back and look up at the window. Through the gap you can see a tiny slice of the night sky, a deep dark blue that is almost black, and you can just make out the faint, cold glimmer of a single star, a point of light that is impossibly far away and yet seems, in the quiet of the stall, to be shining just for you. The stall is now as secure and comfortable as you can make it. The only thing that remains is your own small comfort, and you turn to the wooden shelf where your personal items are stored. Beside your shako and your sabretache there is a tin canteen, a simple cylindrical container with a cork stopper, and you take it down and unscrew the cork. The water inside is cool but not cold, having been warmed slightly by the ambient heat of the stable, and it tastes faintly of tin and of the spring from which it was drawn. You pour some of the water into a tin cup, a small battered vessel that has accompanied you on many campaigns, and you drink slowly, letting the water wash the dust from your throat. The taste is clean and plain, and you realize that you were thirstier than you had thought. You drink a second cup, and then you pour a little water into your palm and splash it on your face, wiping away the last of the dust from the grooming and the faint, gritty residue of the road. The water is refreshing, and you feel more awake for a moment, your senses sharpening, but the wakefulness quickly fades back into the deep, steady calm of the stable. You set the canteen and the cup back on the shelf, and you take off your dolman entirely now, because the stall has grown warm from the heat of the horse's body and the lantern, and the wool is too heavy for sitting still. You fold the dolman carefully, laying it on the shelf beside your other gear, and you are left in just your shirt, a simple linen garment with full sleeves that is soft and comfortable against your skin. You consider removing your boots as well, but you decide against it, because the night is not over, and you may need to move quickly if something disturbs the horses, though such disturbances are rare. Instead, you simply loosen the tops of the boots slightly, easing the pressure on your calves, and you feel the blood flow more freely into your feet. Now you pick up the wooden stool and move it to the corner of the stall where the walls meet, a spot that offers a view of the entire stall and the horse within it. You set the stool down on the deep straw, wiggling its legs into the bedding so that it sits level and steady, and then you sit down, your back against the rough timber of the wall and your feet stretched out in front of you, crossed at the ankles. The stool is hard, but you have sat on it for so many hours over so many nights that your body has grown accustomed to its shape, and you settle into it with the ease of long habit. The straw at your feet is deep and soft, and you push your boots into it, feeling the stalks crunch and yield beneath the leather. The lantern hangs on its hook to your left, and its light falls across the stall in a warm golden pool, illuminating the horse and the straw and the wooden walls, with a soft, even glow that seems almost tangible, as if the light itself were a kind of gentle presence in the room. You sit there, in the quiet, and you watch the horse. He stands with his hind leg cocked, the tip of his hoof resting on the straw, and his head is low, his muzzle nearly touching the bedding. His eyes are half closed, the long lashes drooping, and his ears are relaxed, neither pricked forward nor pinned back, but simply resting in a neutral position that speaks of deep contentment. His breathing is so slow and regular that you can count the seconds between each rise and fall of his ribs. 1, 2, 3, 4, a long, gentle pause, and then the release, a soft exhalation that stirs the straw near his nose. The sounds of the stable have settled into a low, continuous hum of quiet activity, the faint hiss of the lantern, the occasional rustle of straw as the horse shifts his weight, the distant, rhythmic creak of a beam somewhere in the roof as the night cold contracts the timber. Outside, beyond the walls and the thatch, you can hear the very faint hoot of an owl, a single, mournful note that carries across the fields and through the gap in the window. And then there is silence again, a deep, layered silence that is made of many small, soft sounds woven together. Your mind, which has been focused all evening on the tasks of grooming and feeding and bedding down, begins to drift now, untethered from any particular purpose. You think of the road you traveled today, but the thought is distant, like a memory from a previous life, and it has no urgency. You think of the fields and the forests you passed, the way the light fell on the hills in the late afternoon, the sound of the river as you crossed the stone bridge, and these images float through your mind in a slow, dreamy procession, one fading into the next without any effort. You do not hold on to any of them, you simply watch them pass as you watch the horse with a calm, detached attention that requires no energy. The warmth of the stall, the softness of the straw, the steady, hypnotic rhythm of the horse's breathing, all of these things work together to loosen the knots of tension that you had not even realized you were carrying, and you feel your body sinking deeper into the stool, your shoulders dropping, your eyelids growing heavier. You pour yourself one more cup of water from the canteen, drinking it slowly, and the coolness of the liquid is a small, pleasant sensation that grounds you in the present moment. Then you set the cup aside and cross your arms over your chest, tucking your hands into the sleeves of your shirt for warmth. The lantern continues to burn, its flame perfectly steady, and you know that it has enough oil to last until dawn, a small, reliable sun that will keep the darkness at bay while you and the horse rest. The horse opens his eyes for a moment and looks at you, his gaze calm and unfocused, and then he closes them again, the long lashes resting on his cheek. You feel a deep, wordless connection to him in that moment, a bond that has been forged not through dramatic events, but through the slow, patient accumulation of small acts of care. The brushing and the combing and the feeding and the quiet, sitting in the lantern light while the world outside grows cold and dark and silent. The night watch is not a formal duty here in the stable. It is simply what you do, a habit that has become a ritual. You sit and you watch and you listen, and in doing so, you become a part of the stillness rather than an observer of it. The line between you and the horse, between the stall and the rest of the world, between waking and sleeping, begins to blur and soften, and you find yourself in a state that is not quite consciousness and not quite sleep, a kind of floating awareness that is deeply restful. The minutes pass, or perhaps the hours, you cannot tell and you do not care. The horse stands in his golden bed, the lantern casts its golden glow, and you sit in the corner, a quiet guardian of the peace, sinking slowly, gently into the embrace of the night. The horse has not moved in a very long time, or at least it seems that way, though you have lost track of the minutes and the hours and have no desire to find them again. He stands in the deep straw with his off hind hoof tipped up so that only the very edge of the toe touches the bedding, a pose of such complete relaxation that it seems to pull the stillness of the stall even tighter around you both. His head is low, the muzzle hovering just above the straw, and his eyes are closed, the long lashes resting on the curve of his cheek like tiny dark brushes laid down for the night. The chewing and the fidgeting and the occasional stamping have ceased entirely, replaced by a silence so profound that it feels like a presence in its own right, a soft, heavy blanket that wraps around the stall and everything in it. You sit on the wooden stool with your back against the rough-sawn timber of the wall, and you have been sitting there for a while now, your body perfectly still, your hands resting in your lap with the fingers loosely curled, your breathing so shallow and slow that it is almost indistinguishable from the gentle rise and fall of the horse's ribs. The lantern that hangs from its iron hook has begun to burn low, the flame still perfectly steady, but smaller now, a teardrop of gold that has shrunk to a pinpoint of intense brightness, surrounded by a soft, diffuse halo. The oil in the reservoir is nearly gone, and the wick has settled into a slow, even consumption of what remains, a process that will continue until the last of the fuel is drawn up and the flame flickers once and then goes out, but that moment is still some time away. For now, the light is dimmer than it was during the active part of the evening, more amber than yellow, and it casts longer shadows that stretch from the corners of the stall and meet in the middle like old friends gathering for a quiet conversation. The straw on the floor glows with a muted, honeyed warmth, and the horse's coat, which was so bright and gleaming after the grooming, now appears as a deep, velvety chestnut that absorbs the light rather than reflecting it, a dark, living shape that is the anchor of the whole scene. The sounds of the night outside have grown faint and distant, as if the stable were a ship at sea and the world beyond its walls were an ocean of silence that stretches to every horizon. A distant owl calls once, a single low note that rises and falls and then fades into nothing, and the sound is so soft and far away that it might have been a memory rather than a real event. A little later, the very faint rustle of wind in the thatch overhead makes itself known, not a howl or a whistle, but a gentle, intermittent brushing, like the sound of a hand passing lightly over a sheet of rough paper. And it comes and goes without pattern, a random, soothing whisper that speaks of cold air moving through the eaves and the rafters. The timbers of the stable creak occasionally, a low, groaning sound that is the natural settling of wood as the temperature drops and the fibers contract, and each creak is followed by a long silence that seems deeper than the one before it, a silence that swallows the noise and turns it into a memory before it has even finished. Inside the stall, the only sounds are the ones that are so constant they have become a part of the stillness itself, the tiny, steady hiss of the lantern flame, the soft, rhythmic puff of the horse's breath as it stirs the straw near his nostrils, the occasional almost imperceptible rustle of a stalk of straw settling under its own weight. These sounds are not interruptions but rather the threads from which the fabric of the quiet is woven, and you listen to them with an attention that is not focused but diffuse, a kind of hearing that does not try to separate or identify but simply receives. Your own body has grown heavy with the weariness of the long day, a pleasant, deep-seated tiredness that has seeped into your bones and your muscles and your mind, not the sharp fatigue of exhaustion, but the gentle, pervasive ache of work, well done and now complete. Your shoulders have dropped, your head has tilted slightly to one side, and your eyelids have begun to feel as though small, soft weights have been attached to them, pulling them downward with a persistence that is impossible to resist. You do not try to resist, you let them fall half closed, and the stall becomes a blur of warm colors and soft shapes, the horse a dark mass against the golden straw, the lantern a hazy sphere of amber light, the window a faint grey rectangle that is only slightly lighter than the black of the wall. You are not asleep, not yet, but you are drifting in the borderland between waking and dreaming, a place where the edges of things soften and the mind lets go of its grip on the particular and the urgent. In this drifting state, you become aware of the cool air that seeps into the stall from the gap in the window and the space above the half door, a thin, gentle draught that moves across the floor and brushes against your ankles and then rises, stirring the fine hairs on your arms and the back of your neck. The air smells of the cold night outside, of frost and damp earth, and the distant clean scent of pine trees from the forest that stands on the hill beyond the pasture, and it mixes with the warmer smells of the stall, the hay and the horse and the leather and the oil, creating a layered fragrance that is at once invigorating and deeply soothing. You draw the air in through your nose and let it out through your mouth in a slow, silent stream, and your breathing slips into an effortless rhythm that matches the horse's, the two of you inhaling and exhaling together as if you were a single organism sharing the same lungs. After a time, you become aware that the air has grown just cool enough to make you notice the thinness of your linen shirt, and you reach, without fully opening your eyes, for the clean horse blanket that hangs over the partition near your head. The blanket is made of heavy wool, woven in a simple twill pattern, and it is the same dark blue as your dolman, with a few stray horsehairs woven into the fibers and the faint, indelible scent of hay and warm animal that no amount of washing can remove. You pull the blanket down and drape it over your shoulders, tucking the edges under your chin and around your arms, and the weight of it is immediately comforting, a soft, heavy presence that holds the warmth of your body and keeps the cool draft at bay. The wool is slightly rough against your neck, but not unpleasantly so. It feels like a familiar, practical thing, the kind of texture that belongs to stables and long nights and the quiet care of horses. You pull the blanket tighter and lean your head back against the wall, the rough sawn timber pressing against your skull through the thin fabric, and the slight discomfort of the hard surface is balanced by the deep, spreading comfort of the wool and the warmth and the stillness. Your eyes close fully now, not because you have decided to sleep, but because the small effort of keeping them open has become too great, and because the darkness behind your eyelids is a soft, welcoming space that asks nothing of you. You can still see the lantern light through your closed lids, a faint, reddish glow that waxes and wanes with the flicker of the flame, and you can still hear the sounds of the stall, but they have become even more distant, as if a thin veil of gauze had been drawn between you and the world. The shape of the horse is still there in the darkness, a larger darkness within the general dark, and you are aware of him in the same way that you are aware of your own breathing, a constant, reassuring presence that requires no attention but is always there. The straw rustles very softly, and you know without looking that the horse has shifted his weight from one leg to another, a minor adjustment that is part of the slow, ongoing process of rest. The sound is a gentle punctuation in the long, unbroken sentence of the night, and it fades as quickly as it came, leaving the silence deeper than before. The world begins to shrink around you, the boundaries of your awareness drawing inward, until the only things that exist are the stall and the horse and the blanket and the rough wood against your head. The road you travelled today, the patrol, the reports, the distant sound of a trumpet from the fort, all of these things have receded into a grey, formless past that has no purchase on the present moment. Even the other horses in the stable, the grey in the next stall and the bay across the aisle, have faded from your consciousness, their quiet breathing and occasional movements absorbed into the general hum of the building and then forgotten. The only other living thing in the universe is the horse, and the only space is the stall, and the only time is the slow, endless now of the deep night. Your thoughts, which earlier had wandered through memories and images and small, aimless reflections, have now slowed to a trickle, a series of vague, disconnected impressions that drift across your mind like clouds across a still sky and then dissolve without leaving any trace. You think of the feel of the currycomb in your hand, the smooth, worn wood and the gentle scratch of the teeth, and the thought fades. You think of the sound of the water pouring into the bucket from the stone trough, a sound that was cold and clear and musical, and the thought fades. You think of the way the horse's coat gleamed after the brushing, the deep, rich chestnut with its hints of copper, and the thought fades. Each thought is a single, gentle ripple on the surface of a vast, still lake, and after each ripple passes, the stillness returns, deeper and more complete. The lantern flame gives a tiny, almost imperceptible flutter, the first variation in its steady burn since you lit it hours ago, and you know that the oil is nearly exhausted. The light dims for a moment, then steadies again, and the stall is plunged into a deeper amber gloom, the shadows gathering in the corners and creeping outward toward the center. You do not open your eyes to check the flame, you simply accept the changing light as a natural part of the night's progression, a signal that the final hours before dawn are approaching and that the world is turning slowly toward morning. The horse remains utterly still, his breathing so deep and regular that it has become a kind of metronome, a slow, steady pulse that measures the passage of time, not in minutes, but in the rise and fall of his great ribcage, and you find that your own breathing has synchronized with it so completely that you can no longer tell where your breath ends and his begins. The blanket has grown warm from your body heat, and the warmth has spread down your arms and across your chest and into your legs, a slow, creeping comfort that loosens the last of the tension in your muscles and makes your limbs feel heavy and distant, as if they belonged to someone else. Your head lolls slightly to the side, the rough wood of the wall now a familiar, grounding pressure against your temple, and your mouth falls open just a fraction, the jaw relaxing, the tiny muscles around your lips and your forehead smoothing out until your face is as expressionless and peaceful as the horse's. You are no longer sitting in the stall so much as you are dissolving into it, becoming a part of the straw and the timber and the warm hay-scented air, and the boundary between yourself and the world has become so thin and porous that you cannot feel where one ends and the other begins. In the last moments before sleep takes you fully, you are dimly aware of the horse lowering his head even further, his muzzle coming to rest on the straw with a soft, final sigh, a sound that is as much felt as heard, a low, resonant vibration that travels through the floor and up the legs of the stool and into your body. The lantern gives one more tiny flutter, the flame shrinking to a pinpoint and then recovering, and the amber light is now so dim that the stall is a study in deep browns and soft blacks, the horse a barely visible shape against the barely visible straw. The world outside the stable has ceased to exist entirely, the owl and the wind and the creaking timbers absorbed into a vast, featureless silence that stretches in every direction without end. The only thing that remains is the steady, rhythmic sound of the horse's breathing, a sound that has been with you all evening and that follows you now into the depths of sleep, a constant, reassuring thread that connects the waking world to the world of dreams. You do not dream yet, you simply fall, slowly and gently, into a darkness that is warm and soft and without fear, a darkness that smells of hay and wool and the faint, clean scent of a horse's coat. The last conscious thought that drifts through your mind is not a thought at all, but an image, a simple, quiet picture of the stall as you last saw it, with your eyes open, the deep golden straw, the dark, solid shape of the horse, the lantern hanging from its hook with its small, steady flame. The image holds for a moment, and then it too fades, and there is nothing but the breathing and the darkness and the profound, unshakable peace of a night spent in the company of a well-cared-for horse. The stable settles around you both, the timbers creaking one last time and then falling still, and the long, slow hours of the deep night stretch out ahead, silent and undisturbed as you and the horse rest together in the warm, safe heart of the sleeping world.